When Isabella DeLuca called her husband for the fourth time that rainy Chicago night, she wasn't asking for love anymore. She was asking permission to stay alive. Adrian Romano, one of the city's most powerful men, declined the call from a Manhattan penthouse party. When he finally answered, annoyed and distracted, she whispered three words: "I need you." His response, "Not tonight," lasted 2 seconds before the line went dead. 43 seconds. That's how long it took for Isabella to decide her life no longer mattered. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment your city so I can see how far Isabella's journey reaches across the world. Imamt. The rain came down in sheets that October night, turning Chicago's skyline into a blur of fractured light behind floor-to-ceiling windows. Isabella DeLuca sat on the cold marble floor of her master bathroom, knees pulled to her chest, watching water streak down glass like tears she no longer had the strength to cry. The bottle felt heavy in her hand, heavier than it should. White pills rattled inside like promises, or threats, depending on how you looked at it. She was 29 years old. She lived in a penthouse worth $8 million. Her closet held designer clothes she never wore anymore. Her husband controlled half the underground economy in 3 states, and she had never felt more invisible in her entire life. Isabella turned the bottle slowly, studying the label without really reading it. The bathroom was pristine, all white marble and polished chrome, the kind of bathroom featured in architecture magazines. She decorated it herself 2 years ago, back when she still believed this marriage could be saved, back when she still believed Adrian saw her as anything more than an accessory. Her phone lay on the floor beside her, screen dark. 4 missed calls to Adrian, 4 declines. She picked it up with trembling fingers and tried one more time. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Declined. Isabella closed her eyes and let her head fall back against the marble wall. The cold seeped through her silk robe, but she welcomed it. At least it was something to feel. For months now, she'd felt nothing but a hollow ache that had burrowed so deep into her chest she couldn't remember what it felt like to breathe without it. The phone buzzed in her hand. She looked down, heart lurching with something that might have been hope if she'd had any left. Adrian's name lit up the screen. She answered before the second ring, pressing the phone to her ear with both hands like it might slip away. "Adrian." "What is it, Isabella?" His voice carried that edge of irritation she'd become intimately familiar with over the past year. Background noise filtered through, music, laughter, the clink of glasses. A party, of course. "I'm in the middle of something." She could hear a woman's laugh in the background, high and bright and carefree. Everything Isabella used to be. "I need you." The words came out barely above a whisper, cracked and desperate. "Please, I need you to come home." A pause, long enough that she thought he might have heard something in her voice, long enough that she thought he might actually care. "Not tonight." The line went dead. Isabella stared at the phone in her hand. Not tonight. 2 words. That's all she was worth. Not tonight, as if she'd asked him to pick up milk on the way home. Not tonight, as if her voice hadn't been shaking. Not tonight, as if she hadn't called him 4 times before this. Not tonight, as if she mattered at all. The bottle felt lighter now. Or maybe her hands just felt heavier. She twisted the cap slowly, the child safety mechanism giving way with a soft click that seemed too loud in the silent bathroom. This wasn't how she'd imagined her life turning out. She'd met Adrian Romano 3 years ago at her father's funeral. Giuseppe DeLuca had been a respected businessman, legitimate, mostly, with connections throughout Chicago's Italian community. Adrian had come to pay respects, sharp in a black suit, his presence commanding even in grief. He'd found her afterward, standing alone by the grave while everyone else gathered at the reception. "Your father was a good man," he'd said. "One of the few who kept his word." She'd looked up at him, this stranger with dark eyes, and an intensity that made her feel seen for the first time since her father's heart attack. "You knew him well. Well enough to know his daughter inherited his strength." It was a line. She knew that, even then. But she'd been drowning in grief and loneliness, and Adrian Romano had thrown her a rope. She'd grabbed it without looking at what it was tied to. The courtship had been intense. Adrian didn't do anything halfway. Flowers arrived daily. He took her to restaurants where senators ate and business was conducted in Italian over wine older than she was. He made her feel protected in a world that suddenly seemed too large and complicated without her father's steady presence. "You deserve to be taken care of," he'd told her over dinner at a restaurant where the staff knew him by name. "Your father would have wanted that." She'd believed him. More than that, she'd needed to believe him. They married 6 months later in a ceremony that was more business merger than wedding. She'd worn her mother's dress, altered to fit. Adrian had worn a tuxedo that cost more than her childhood home. 300 guests attended, most of whom she'd never met. She'd told herself it was romantic, that this was what love looked like in Adrian's world, grand and public and permanent. The first year, she'd been happy, or something close to it. Adrian worked long hours, disappeared for days sometimes, but when he was home, he was present, attentive. He'd hold her in the dark and tell her she was the only good thing in his life. "Everyone else wants something from me," he'd whisper against her hair. "You're the only one who just wants me." She'd believe that too. The shift happened so gradually she didn't notice at first. Conversations became shorter, touches became rare. He stopped coming to bed before she fell asleep, started taking calls in other rooms, began looking at her like she was furniture, something that had always been there and always would be, requiring no particular attention. She tried everything, made his favorite meals, wore the lingerie he used to love, planned date nights he canceled with increasing frequency. Each attempt was met with distracted thanks or vague promises to make it up to her later. Later never came. 6 months ago, she'd stopped trying. What was the point? You couldn't force someone to see you. You couldn't make someone care. And then, a week ago, she'd discovered why Adrian had become so distant. She'd gone to meet her sister for lunch at a restaurant in River North. While waiting for the valet, she'd glanced at the newspaper box on the corner. The society page showed Adrian at a charity gala she hadn't known he was attending, with another woman. The photo showed them laughing together, his hand on the small of her back, the way he used to touch Isabella. The caption identified her as Simone Laurent, a 24-year-old model who'd recently relocated from Paris. Isabella had bought the paper with shaking hands. Inside was a full spread, more photos of Adrian and Simone at various events over the past 3 months. The theater, art gallery openings, a restaurant she and Adrian had gone to on their first anniversary. He wasn't even hiding it. That's what hurt most. Not the affair itself, though that carved a hole through her chest, but the casual public nature of it. Adrian Romano, who controlled his image with ruthless precision, was openly parading around with his mistress, which meant he didn't care who knew, didn't care what Isabella thought, didn't care about her at all. She'd confronted him that night. He'd come home late, smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. "I saw the photos," she'd said, standing in their bedroom with the newspaper in her hands. Adrian had barely glanced at them. "And?" The single word had knocked the air from her lungs. "And? That's all you have to say?" He'd loosened his tie, moving past her toward the bathroom. "What do you want me to say, Isabella? That I'm sorry? That it won't happen again?" He'd turned to look at her, his expression flat, bored. "We both know that would be a lie. I'm your wife. You're my wife on paper." His voice was cold, clinical. "You have everything you need, a home, security, my name. What more do you want? I want you to love me." The words had broken on the way out, desperate and pathetic. Adrian had studied her for a long moment, and for just a second, she'd seen something flicker across his face. Pity, maybe, or disgust. "I never promised you that." He'd closed the bathroom door between them. Isabella had stood there for 20 minutes, staring at that closed door before she'd finally walked away. The next 3 days had been a blur. She'd moved through the penthouse like a ghost, invisible even to the staff. Adrian came and went without speaking to her. Twice she'd walked into rooms where he was on the phone, and he'd looked right through her like she wasn't there. That's when she'd realized the truth. She had disappeared. Not all at once, but slowly, over months and months of being dismissed and ignored and treated like she didn't matter. She had faded into the background of her own life until there was almost nothing left. And the worst part? She'd let it happen. She'd spent her childhood watching her mother be strong after her father died. Teresa DeLuca had raised 2 daughters alone, worked 2 jobs, never complained. She'd taught Isabella that strength meant endurance, that love meant sacrifice. that good women held families together no matter what. But her mother had been loved, respected. Her father had cherished her until the day he died. Adrian didn't even see Isabella anymore. Earlier that evening, she'd written him a letter. It had taken her 3 hours and 4 drafts to find the words. She'd told him everything, how his indifference had killed her inch by inch, how she'd tried so hard to be enough, how she was sorry for failing him even though she knew the failure was his. She'd ended it simply, "I'm sorry I couldn't be what you needed. I'm sorry I couldn't make you stay. I'm sorry I wasn't worth loving." The letter sat on the kitchen counter now, next to her wedding ring. He'd find them both eventually, if he even came home. Isabella turned the pill bottle in her hands again. The bathroom was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat, rapid and uneven. How had it come to this? How had she, straight-A student, college graduate, daughter of Giuseppe De Luca, ended up on a bathroom floor contemplating her own extinction? Because extinction was what it felt like. Not death exactly, but erasure. The final step in a disappearing act that had been happening for months. If she was already invisible, what difference would it make? Her phone buzzed. For one wild second, hope flared. Maybe Adrian was calling back. Maybe he'd heard something in her voice. Maybe he actually cared. But it was her younger sister, Natalia. "Are you okay? Haven't heard from you in days. Call me." Isabella stared at the message. Sweet Natalia, who was completing her medical residency at Northwestern, who still believed the world was fundamentally good. Who thought Isabella's marriage to Adrian was romantic? She couldn't call Natalia. Couldn't explain this. Couldn't bear to hear the concern in her sister's voice because it would only make this harder. Instead, she set the phone face down on the marble and opened the pill bottle. The sound of pills spilling into her palm seemed obscenely loud. She counted them without meaning to. More than enough. The prescription was for sleeping, but she'd researched. She knew what this many would do. She thought about her father. Wondered what he'd say if he could see her now. Giuseppe De Luca had been strong, principled, protective. He taught her to value herself, to never let anyone diminish her. She'd failed him too. The first pill felt small against her tongue, insignificant, just like she was. She reached for the glass of water she'd prepared. Heavy footsteps echoed through the penthouse. Isabella froze, the glass halfway to her lips. Adrian? No, his footsteps were familiar, measured. These were different, heavier, multiple sets. A man's voice called out, deep and commanding, "Isabella De Luca." Not Romano. De Luca. Her father's name. The bathroom door was closed, but not locked. She heard the footsteps moving closer, deliberate and unhurried. "I know you're in there." The voice was closer now, just outside the bathroom. "Your sister called me. Said she was worried. Said you weren't answering your phone." Natalia. Of course, sweet, persistent Natalia, who never knew when to let things go. "I'm fine," Isabella called out, her voice steadier than she felt. "You can leave." "I'm not leaving." A pause. "And you're not fine." "Open the door, Isabella." "Go away." She closed her fist around the remaining pills. "Please, just go away." "Can't do that." The door handle turned slowly. "Your father saved my life once. Made me promise I'd look after his daughters if anything happened to him. I've got 2 men out here who'll break this door down if you don't open it in the next 10 seconds. Your choice. Open it, or we're coming in." Isabella looked at the pills in her hand, at the water glass, at the pristine white bathroom that had witnessed her unraveling. 10 seconds, the man repeated, starting now. She could do it. Could swallow them all before he broke through. Could finally stop feeling this crushing weight of not being enough. 9, 8. But something in his voice, the certainty, the command, the complete absence of negotiation, reminded her of her father, made her remember what it felt like to be seen by someone who actually cared if she lived or died. 7, 6. With shaking hands, Isabella set down the water glass. She looked at the pills in her palm one last time, then slowly poured them back into the bottle. 5, 4. She stood on unsteady legs, her silk robe sliding against marble as she moved toward the door. 3, 2. She turned the lock. The door opened before she could step back. A man filled the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, maybe 45, with dark hair graying at the temples and eyes that missed nothing. He wore an expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the controlled power in his frame. Behind him stood two younger men, clearly security, hands near their jackets. The older man's gaze swept the bathroom in less than a second. The pill bottle, the water glass, the phone on the floor, Isabella's trembling hands. His expression didn't change, but something hardened in his eyes. "Leonardo Caruso," he said, as if she should know the name. When she didn't react, he added, "Your father and I did business together. He was a friend." Isabella wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how she must look, barefoot in a silk robe, hair tangled, eyes red from hours of silent crying. "I don't need," she started. "Yes, you do." He cut her off with the calm authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Get dressed. You're coming with me. This is my home. This is a cage." His voice was gentle but implacable. "And you're coming with me before you do something that can't be undone. But you can't just— Your sister is waiting for you. She's in my car downstairs, losing her mind with worry. You can walk out of here on your own feet, or I can carry you out. But you are leaving this apartment tonight." Isabella looked past him at the bedroom she'd shared with Adrian, at the life she'd tried so hard to build, at the version of herself she'd lost somewhere along the way. "I left a letter," she whispered, "on the kitchen counter, and my ring." Leonardo nodded to one of his men, who disappeared toward the kitchen. "He won't care," Isabella continued, her voice hollow. "He won't even notice I'm gone." "Then he's a fool." Leonardo stepped into the bathroom, his presence somehow both overwhelming and oddly comforting. "But that's not your problem anymore. Get dressed, Isabella. 5 minutes." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he didn't understand, that leaving wouldn't fix anything, that the damage was already done. But when she looked up at Leonardo Caruso, she saw something she hadn't seen in Adrian's eyes for over a year. She saw someone who actually saw her, not as an inconvenience or an obligation, but as a person worth saving. 5 minutes, he repeated. "Then we're gone." Isabella nodded slowly and moved toward her closet. Her hands still shook as she pulled out jeans and a sweater. Simple clothes, nothing like the designer pieces Adrian preferred her to wear. She dressed quickly in the bathroom while Leonardo waited outside, his presence a solid barrier between her and the pills she'd almost taken. When she emerged, the security guard was back holding her letter and wedding ring. "Leave them," Leonardo instructed. "Let him find them. Let him understand what he almost did." Isabella grabbed her purse and phone, moving mechanically. This didn't feel real. Felt like watching herself from outside her body, going through motions without fully being present. They walked through the penthouse together, Leonardo slightly ahead, his men flanking them. Every step took her farther from the bathroom, from the pills, from the decision she'd been seconds away from making. In the elevator, Isabella finally spoke. "How do you know my sister?" "She called every contact in your father's old address book tonight, looking for someone who could help. Took her 2 hours to reach me." Leonardo's expression was grim. "Smart girl, persistent, like her father." "I didn't want her to worry." "She loves you. That's what people who love you do. They worry. They show up. They refuse to let you disappear." He looked at her directly. "Unlike your husband." The elevator doors opened to the parking garage. A black Mercedes waited with the engine running. Through the tinted window, Isabella could see Natalia's face, tear-streaked and desperate. The moment Isabella stepped out, Natalia burst from the car and ran to her, grabbing her in a fierce hug that nearly knocked them both over. "Don't you ever," Natalia sobbed into her shoulder, "ever do this to me again. I thought, when you didn't answer, I thought I'd lost you." Isabella held her sister, and for the first time that night, she cried. Real tears, hot and overwhelming, soaking into Natalia's jacket as months of silent suffering finally broke through. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I'm so sorry." Leonardo gave them a moment, then gently guided them both toward the car. "We need to move. Adrian has people everywhere. I'd rather have this conversation somewhere more secure." They drove through Chicago's rain-soaked streets in silence. Natalia held Isabella's hand the entire time, gripping so tight it almost hurt. Isabella stared out the window, watching the city blur past, feeling disconnected from everything. They pulled up to a brownstone in Lincoln Park, elegant but understated. Leonardo's men swept the area before allowing them to exit the car. Inside, the home was warm and lived in. Nothing like Adrian's cold penthouse. Leather furniture, bookshelves filled with actual books, photographs on the walls. A home, not a showpiece. Sit, Leonardo instructed, pointing to the sofa. A woman appeared with tea and blankets, efficient and kind. Leonardo's wife, maybe, though she didn't say. When they were settled, Leonardo sat across from them, his posture relaxed but his attention absolute. "Tell me what happened," he said to Isabella. "Everything." So she did. Started with the wedding, with the slow erosion of her marriage, with the photos in the newspaper. Told him about tonight, about the calls, about Adrian's dismissal, about the pills. She didn't cry. Had no tears left, just spoke in a flat, exhausted monotone while Natalia held her hand and Leonardo listened without interruption. When she finished, silence filled the room. Finally, Leonardo spoke. "Your husband is Adrian Romano." It wasn't a question, but Isabella nodded anyway. "I know him, know what he is." Leonardo's expression was carefully neutral. "Your father kept you away from this world, from people like Romano, like me. He wanted better for his daughters. He would be so disappointed," Isabella whispered. "He would be proud of you." Leonardo leaned forward, his voice intense. "You survived. You asked for help. You're still here. That takes more strength than you know. I almost wasn't here. But you are. And now we deal with what comes next." Isabella shook her head. "There's nothing to deal with. I'll go back, file for divorce. It'll be—" "No." The single word carried absolute finality. "You're not going back to that apartment. Not tonight. Not ever, unless you choose to, and you're protected when you do." "I don't need protection from my own husband." Leonardo and Natalia exchanged a look. "Isabella," Natalia said gently, "you almost died tonight. Because of him, because he made you feel worthless. That's not a man you go back to alone." "You'll stay here," Leonardo continued, "as long as you need. Tomorrow we'll contact the best divorce attorney in Chicago. We'll make sure you're safe and protected. And we'll make sure Adrian understands what he almost did." "He won't care." "Then we'll make him care." Leonardo's smile was cold. "I've known men like Adrian Romano my whole life. They think their power makes them untouchable, that their wives are possessions they can ignore or discard at will. But your father was my friend, Isabella, and I take care of my friends' families." Something in his tone made Isabella realize that Leonardo Caruso was exactly what Adrian pretended to be, truly powerful, truly dangerous, and bound by a code that actually meant something. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "Because your father helped me when no one else would. Because Natalia called me tonight, terrified she was going to lose her sister. Because no woman should feel so invisible in her own life that death seems like the only way to be seen." He paused. "And because I have a daughter. If she ever needed help and I wasn't there, I'd want someone to do for her what I'm doing for you." Isabella felt something shift inside her. Not hope, exactly, but maybe the possibility of hope. "Get some rest," Leonardo said, standing. "Tomorrow, we start fixing this. Tonight, you're safe." As Natalia led her upstairs to a guest room, Isabella looked back at Leonardo Caruso. This man who'd been a stranger 3 hours ago, who'd broken into her bathroom and quite literally saved her life. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded once. "Your father saved my life once. Now we're even." But they both knew that wasn't true. Life debts didn't work that way. And somehow, Isabella suspected Leonardo Caruso was the kind of man who always paid what he owed, with interest. The guest room was simple but comfortable. Natalia helped her change into borrowed pajamas, then climbed into bed beside her like they were children again, sharing secrets in the dark. "I almost lost you tonight," Natalia whispered. "When you didn't answer your phone, I just knew something was wrong." "How did you know to call Leonardo?" "I found Dad's old address book in Mom's attic last month. Was going to give it to you, actually. When you didn't answer, I just started calling everyone in it until someone picked up." Natalia was quiet for a moment. He answered on the first ring, didn't ask questions, just said, "Give me the address." 15 minutes later, he was breaking into your building. He broke in? Apparently Adrian's security is very good, but not good enough. Natalia squeezed her hand. I don't know what Dad did for him, but Leonardo Caruso is serious about paying that debt. They lay in silence, listening to rain against the windows. I'm sorry, Isabella finally said, for scaring you. For almost... Don't! Natalia's voice broke. Don't apologize. Just promise me you'll never get that close to the edge again without calling me first. Promise me, Bella. I promise. It was a lie. They both knew it. Depression didn't work that way, didn't offer convenient pauses for phone calls. But it was the promise Natalia needed to hear, so Isabella gave it to her. She closed her eyes, exhausted beyond measure, and tried not to think about Adrian finding the letter, finding her ring, coming home to an empty apartment. Tried not to wonder if he'd even care. Somewhere across the city, in a Manhattan penthouse at a party that was finally winding down, Adrian Romano declined another call from his wife. He didn't recognize the number that called him next, so he ignored that one too. He wouldn't check his messages until the plane landed back in Chicago the next afternoon. Wouldn't read Isabella's letter until late that night. Wouldn't truly understand what he'd almost lost until it was already gone. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, in Leonardo Caruso's brownstone, Isabella De Luca lay awake in the dark and tried to remember what it felt like to matter. Tried to imagine a version of herself that existed beyond the shadow of Adrian Romano's indifference. The pills were miles away now. The bathroom, the penthouse, the woman who'd sat on cold marble contemplating extinction. She'd left her wedding ring on the counter, but she'd kept her name, kept the breath in her lungs, kept the possibility, however small, that somewhere beyond this darkness was a version of her life where she wasn't invisible, where she mattered, where she was enough. The rain continued falling against the windows, washing Chicago clean, and Isabella De Luca, almost suicide, almost statistic, closed her eyes and chose, for tonight at least, to survive. Isabella woke to unfamiliar sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. For 3 disorienting seconds, she didn't know where she was. Then memory crashed back. The pills, Leonardo breaking down her bathroom door, Natalia's tears, the drive through rain-soaked streets to this brownstone that smelled like coffee and safety. She'd survived the night. The realization should have brought relief. Instead, it brought a crushing wave of shame. What kind of person sat on a bathroom floor contemplating their own death? What kind of wife drove her husband so far away that he couldn't even be bothered to answer when she called? Natalia was gone from the bed, but there was a note on the nightstand in her sister's familiar scrawl. Downstairs when you're ready, take your time. Love you. Isabella sat up slowly, her body aching like she'd run a marathon. The borrowed pajamas were too big, hanging loose on her frame. When had she gotten so thin? She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a full meal. Couldn't remember the last time food had seemed worth the effort. A knock on the door made her flinch. It's Maria, a woman's voice called softly. Leonardo's housekeeper, I've brought you some things. Isabella pulled the blanket around herself before answering. Come in. The woman who entered was maybe 60, with kind eyes and an efficient manner. She carried a tray with coffee, toast, and fruit, along with a stack of neatly folded clothes. I guessed your size, Maria said, setting everything on the dresser. If they don't fit, we'll find something else. Mr. Caruso wants you to know you're welcome to stay as long as you need. That's very kind, but I can't impose. You're not imposing, you're accepting help. There's a difference. Maria moved toward the door, then paused. Your sister told me what happened last night. My daughter went through something similar 5 years ago. Different circumstances, same darkness. She's married now, happy, with a baby on the way. I'm telling you this because when you're in it, it feels permanent. But it's not. The darkness isn't permanent, honey. I promise you that. The door closed softly before Isabella could respond. She stared at the coffee, steam rising in delicate spirals. Someone had brought her breakfast. Someone cared if she ate. After months of invisible meals in an empty penthouse, the simple gesture felt overwhelming. She forced herself to drink the coffee and eat half a piece of toast. The clothes Maria brought fit reasonably well. Jeans, a soft sweater, socks. Real clothes, not the designer pieces Adrian preferred. She caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized herself. When had her cheekbones gotten so pronounced? When had her eyes developed those dark circles? When had she become a ghost? Downstairs, she found Natalia and Leonardo in a sunlit kitchen that looked nothing like Adrian's sterile, all-white designer space. This kitchen had warm wood cabinets, plants on the windowsill, a bulletin board covered with photographs and shopping lists, and a child's crayon drawing. "There she is," Leonardo said, looking up from his newspaper. "Coffee?" "I had some upstairs, thank you." Natalia jumped up and pulled out a chair. "Sit. Maria made enough breakfast to feed an army." Isabella sat, acutely aware of how out of place she felt. These people had their lives interrupted by her crisis, had opened their home to a stranger, and here she was accepting their hospitality like it was somehow owed to her. "Stop it," Leonardo said quietly. She looked up, startled. "Stop what?" "Whatever you're thinking. That look on your face, that's guilt, shame. The voice telling you you're a burden." He set down his newspaper. "That voice is a liar, Isabella, and we don't entertain liars in this house." "You don't know me." "I know enough. I know you're Giuseppe De Luca's daughter. I know you married a man who made you feel worthless. I know that last night you chose to live when dying seemed easier." He poured himself more coffee. "That tells me everything I need to know." Natalia pushed a plate of food toward her. "Eat, please. You're scary thin, Bella." Isabella picked at the eggs, forcing herself to take small bites. Across the table, Leonardo studied her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow wasn't. "We need to talk about next steps," he said finally. "But first, I need to know. Do you want a divorce?" The word hung in the air between them. Divorce. The ending of her marriage, the public admission of failure, the proof that she hadn't been enough. "I don't know," she whispered. "Maybe He won't." Leonardo's voice was firm but not unkind. "Whatever you're about to say, maybe he'll change, maybe he'll realize what he's losing, maybe he'll come back. He won't. Men like Adrian Romano don't change unless they're forced to, and even then, rarely." "You don't know him." "I know men like him. I've been one." Leonardo leaned back in his chair. "Your father once told me something I never forgot. He said the measure of a man isn't his power or his wealth or even his word. It's how he treats the people who can't fight back, the people who depend on him." He paused. "Adrian had you completely dependent on him, isolated, financially tied to him. And he used that power to make you disappear. That's not a man who deserves a second chance." "But marriage is supposed to be sacred forever. Work?" Natalia cut in, her voice sharper than Isabella had ever heard it. "You almost died last night, Bella. You were seconds away from swallowing those pills. That's not a marriage worth saving. That's a prison you need to escape." Isabella's hands shook around her fork. "You don't understand. In our world, divorce is your world." Leonardo's eyebrow rose. "You mean Adrian's world, the world he trapped you in, the world where his reputation matters more than your life. People will talk. Let them." He shrugged. "They'll talk anyway. Might as well give them something worth discussing." A phone rang. Leonardo glanced at the screen and stood. "Excuse me, I need to take this." He left the kitchen, and Isabella heard his voice in the next room, low and commanding, giving orders, making arrangements, being the kind of man who made things happen with a single phone call. Natalia reached across the table and took her hand. "Talk to me, Bella. Really talk to me. What do you want?" What did she want? It was such a simple question. She should have an answer. But after 2 years of molding herself to fit Adrian's expectations, of making herself smaller and quieter and less demanding, she honestly didn't know. "I want to not feel like this anymore," she said finally. "I want to wake up and not immediately think about how I failed. I want to exist without feeling like I'm taking up too much space. I want—" Her voice cracked. "I want to matter to someone. Anyone. You matter to me." Natalia's grip tightened. "You've always mattered to me. And to Mom. And to Dad before he died. Adrian not seeing your worth doesn't make you worthless. It makes him blind. Then why does it feel like I'm dying inside? Because he spent 2 years convincing you that his perception was reality. That if he didn't see you, you didn't exist." Natalia's eyes were fierce. "But you do exist, Bella. You're real. You're here. And you're going to survive this." Leonardo returned, slipping his phone into his pocket. "That was my attorney. Best divorce lawyer in Illinois. She can see you this afternoon if you're ready." "I don't know if I'm ready." "You don't have to be ready. You just have to be willing." He sat back down. Here's what I propose. You meet with the attorney. Hear your options. Learn what a divorce would actually look like. Timeline, finances, everything. Then you decide. No pressure. No timeline. Your choice. It was the first time in months someone had given Isabella a choice about anything. And Adrian? She asked. What happens when he finds out I'm here? He already knows. Her heart stopped. What? I called him this morning, told him you were safe and under my protection, told him you'd be filing for divorce, and that he'd agree to every single term without negotiation. Leonardo's expression was cold. He wasn't happy about it.
You can't just... He's dangerous. You don't understand. Isabella. Leonardo's voice cut through her panic. I've known Adrian Romano since he was running errands for his uncle. I know exactly what he is. And more importantly, he knows exactly what I am. He won't touch you, not while you're under my roof. But when I leave, we'll make sure you're protected. Always. That's not something you need to worry about. Natalia squeezed her hand. What did Adrian say when you told him? Leonardo's smile was thin and dangerous. He said Isabella was his wife, and I had no right to interfere. I reminded him that his wife called him 4 times last night begging for help, and he declined every call. That his wife almost died because he couldn't be bothered to come home. He paused. Then I reminded him of a few business arrangements we have. Made it clear that his cooperation in this divorce would be in everyone's best interest. You threatened him, Isabella whispered. I motivated him. There's a difference. She should have been horrified, should have been afraid of what Adrian would do, how he'd retaliate. But instead, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Protected. Someone was actually standing between her and the man who'd made her feel worthless. Someone was fighting for her. The letter, she said suddenly. Did he read my letter? Leonardo's expression softened slightly. I don't know. My contact at the building said he came home late yesterday afternoon. Stayed for 20 minutes. Left with 2 suitcases. He took his things. Looks that way. So Adrian had found the letter, found the ring, found the pills she'd left on the bathroom counter. And instead of calling her, instead of making sure she was alive, he'd packed a bag and left. The realization should have hurt, should have crushed whatever remained of her heart. Instead, it crystallized something inside her. A hard, cold certainty that Natalia and Leonardo were right. Adrian Romano didn't deserve another chance. I'll meet with the attorney, Isabella said quietly. This afternoon. I want to know my options. Leonardo nodded once, satisfied. Good. Maria will make sure you have everything you need. The attorney's office is downtown. I'll have my driver take you and Natalia. You're not coming? Better if I'm not there. This needs to be your decision, made without any influence from me. But you'll be safe. I'll have 2 men outside the building, just in case. Just in case Adrian decided to show up. Just in case he decided she didn't get to leave after all. The morning passed in a strange fog. Isabella showered, dressed in clothes that fit but didn't feel like hers, tried to eat lunch and managed half a sandwich. Natalia stayed close, never quite touching but always within reach, like she was afraid Isabella might disappear if she looked away. At 2 o'clock, Leonardo's driver pulled up in a different car, a nondescript sedan instead of the Mercedes from last night. Smart, less noticeable. The attorney's office was in a sleek downtown building, all glass and steel. The receptionist smiled warmly and led them to a conference room with a view of the lake. Catherine Chen was nothing like Isabella expected. Maybe 50, sharp suit, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She shook Isabella's hand with a firm grip and gestured to the chairs. Leonardo tells me you're considering divorce, she said without preamble. Before we discuss specifics, I need to understand your situation. Start from the beginning. So Isabella told her story again. The whirlwind courtship, the slow erosion, the affair, the night she almost didn't survive. Catherine took notes, asked pointed questions, never interrupted with sympathy or judgment. When Isabella finished, Catherine set down her pen. Okay, here's what you need to know. Illinois is a no-fault divorce state, which means you don't need to prove Adrian did anything wrong. You just need to prove irreconcilable differences, which you clearly have. The marriage is only 2 years old, so we're looking at a relatively straightforward division of assets. I don't want his money, Isabella said quickly.
I just want out. With respect, that's your trauma talking, not your common sense. Catherine's voice was kind but firm. You gave up your career to marry him. You have no current income. You're entitled to spousal support while you get back on your feet. This isn't about punishment. It's about making sure you can survive independently. Natalia leaned forward. What about the penthouse? Isabella decorated it, lived there, in Adrian's name only, I assume? When Isabella nodded, Catherine continued. Then it's his separate property. But any increase in value during the marriage is marital property. We can negotiate. I don't want to go back there, Isabella said. Ever. You won't have to. We can arrange for your personal belongings to be collected and delivered wherever you're staying. They spent the next hour discussing details, timelines, asset division, support calculations. Catherine explained everything in clear, simple terms, never rushing, never making Isabella feel stupid for not understanding. Finally, Catherine leaned back in her chair. I need to be honest with you, Isabella. Leonardo Caruso called me personally this morning. In 20 years of practice, he's never done that. Whatever relationship he had with your father must have been significant. They were friends. Leonardo doesn't have friends. He has associates, employees, and people who owe him favors. The fact that he's involving himself in your situation tells me your father saved his life, or something equally profound. She paused, which means Adrian Romano is going to agree to whatever terms we propose. Leonardo will make sure of it. That doesn't seem fair. Fair? Catherine's laugh was sharp. Your husband publicly paraded his mistress around Chicago while you were home contemplating suicide. Fair went out the window months ago. This is about survival, about making sure you have the resources to rebuild your life. I just want it to be over. Then let me do my job. I'll file the petition tomorrow. Illinois has a 6-month waiting period for divorces, but we can have the financial settlement done in weeks. You'll walk away with enough to live comfortably while you figure out your next steps. Isabella signed the retainer agreement with shaking hands. This was real. She was actually doing this, ending her marriage, admitting failure, starting over at 29 with nothing but borrowed clothes and a sister who refused to let her give up. On the drive back to Leonardo's brownstone, Natalia was quiet. Finally, she said, Are you okay? I don't know. Ask me in 6 months. You're doing the right thing, Bella. I know it doesn't feel like it, but you are. How do you know? Because yesterday you wanted to die. Today you're choosing to live. That's progress. Back at the brownstone, Leonardo was waiting in his study. He looked up when they entered, assessing Isabella's expression in one glance. How did it go? Catherine says you'll make sure Adrian cooperates. Isabella sat down without being invited. Why are you doing this, really? It can't just be because of my father. Leonardo studied her for a long moment. You want the truth? Please. Your father didn't just save my life, he saved my soul. He poured 3 glasses of whiskey, handed them out. 20 years ago, I was where Adrian is now, powerful, arrogant, convinced my empire was all that mattered. I had a wife, beautiful woman, loved me despite what I was. And I ignored her, dismissed her, made her feel invisible because I was too busy building my kingdom. He took a drink before continuing. She left me, took our daughter, and disappeared. It took me 3 months to find them. By then, she'd filed for divorce and gotten a restraining order. I lost 5 years of my daughter's childhood because I was too stupid to see what I had. What happened? Your father sat me down and told me some hard truths. Said a man who couldn't take care of his own family had no business running a criminal empire. Said power without purpose was just tyranny. He gave me a choice, change or lose everything that actually mattered. Leonardo's smile was sad. I chose to change. Took years. Therapy, actually. Can you imagine? Leonardo Caruso in therapy. Did you get your family back? Eventually. My ex-wife remarried, but she let me see my daughter, build a relationship. I'm walking her down the aisle next spring. He set down his glass. I'm helping you because I know what Adrian is. Because I was Adrian. And because I know that the worst thing I ever did was make my wife feel like she didn't matter. If I can stop him from destroying you the way I almost destroyed her, then maybe I can balance some small part of my ledger. Isabella felt tears burning her eyes. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me. survive, rebuild. Become the woman you were before Adrian Romano made you doubt yourself. That's thanks enough. Natalia raised her glass. To surviving, Leonardo raised his. To becoming. Isabella lifted hers, the whiskey catching the afternoon light. To mattering. They drank together, and for the first time since she'd sat on that bathroom floor with pills in her hand, Isabella felt something other than crushing despair. She felt possibility. The next 3 days passed in a strange, suspended reality. Catherine filed the divorce petition. Adrian's attorney, clearly operating under instructions, responded within 24 hours with surprisingly reasonable counterproposals. Leonardo's men collected Isabella's personal belongings from the penthouse while Adrian was conveniently out of town. Isabella spent those days in Leonardo's brownstone, sleeping too much and eating too little, trying to process 2 years of accumulated trauma.
Maria brought her meals and didn't comment when most of them went uneaten. Natalia came by every evening after her shift at the hospital, bringing stories from the outside world and refusing to let Isabella withdraw completely. On the 4th morning, Leonardo knocked on her door. "There's someone here to see you," he said. "Says his name is Marcus Webb. Claims he's an old friend from college." Isabella's heart lurched. Marcus. She hadn't seen him in 3 years, not since Adrian had gradually isolated her from everyone she'd known before the marriage. I can't. You can say no. I can send him away." Leonardo's expression was gentle, but Maria says he's been sitting in his car across the street for 2 hours, working up the courage to knock. Says he looks genuinely worried. Isabella closed her eyes. Marcus had been her best friend at Northwestern. They'd studied together, complained about professors together, dreamed about their futures over terrible coffee in the library. Then she'd married Adrian, and Marcus had called less and less until finally he'd stopped calling at all. She told herself it was natural, that married people drifted from single friends, that it was fine. But the truth was, Adrian had made it clear her old friends weren't welcome in their new life. 5 minutes, she said finally. "I'll see him for 5 minutes." Leonardo nodded and left. Isabella changed quickly, ran a brush through her hair, tried to look like less of a disaster. Failed. Marcus waited in the living room, standing by the window with his hands in his pockets. He turned when she entered, and his expression crumpled. "Jesus, Bella, what happened to you?" She must look worse than she thought. "It's been a rough week. Your sister called me, said you were in trouble, said..." He stopped, clearly struggling. "Said that you tried to..." "I didn't try. I considered. There's a difference." She sat down, suddenly exhausted. "How did you know to come here?" "Natalia gave me the address. Said you were staying with a family friend." Marcus sat across from her, keeping distance between them like she might break. "I should have called sooner, should have checked on you. I knew something was wrong, but I told myself it wasn't my business, that you were married and I should respect that." "It wasn't your fault, wasn't it? I saw how Romano isolated you, saw how you stopped showing up to reunions, stopped answering calls. I should have pushed harder, should have made you talk to me. Adrian wouldn't have liked that. Fuck what Adrian would have liked." Marcus's voice was harsh with anger and guilt. "You were my friend first. I shouldn't have let him take you away." They sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment. "Why did you come?" Isabella asked finally. "Because Natalia said you needed friends. Because I've been a shitty friend for 3 years, and I want to fix that. Because..." He ran a hand through his hair. "Because when we graduated, you made me promise that if you ever lost yourself, I'd remind you who you were. Remember?" She did remember. Late night in the library, both of them drunk on exhaustion and cheap wine smuggled in water bottles, making grandiose promises about staying true to themselves no matter what life threw at them. "I remember. So I'm here to remind you. You're Isabella De Luca. You graduated summa cum laude with a degree in art history. You can identify any Renaissance painter from 30 feet away. You cry at documentaries about endangered species. You laugh too loud at terrible jokes. You're stubborn and kind and brilliant, and you deserve so much better than a man who made you question your worth." Tears streamed down her face. "I don't feel like that person anymore. Then we'll find her again." Marcus leaned forward, his expression fierce. "Together. the way we were supposed to do it before Romano got in the way.
I'm filing for divorce. Good. He never deserved you. Everyone will say I failed. Everyone who matters will say you survived. He reached across and took her hand carefully, like she was made of glass. You're going to get through this, Bella. I promise. And I'm not disappearing again. Something in Isabella's chest loosened slightly. Not hope, exactly. But maybe the foundation hope could eventually build on. Thank you, she whispered. Thank me by eating something. Natalia says you're barely keeping food down. I'm trying. Try harder. The Isabella I knew could demolish an entire pizza after finals. Where's that woman? She disappeared somewhere between the wedding and last Tuesday. Then let's go find her. Marcus stood and held out his hand. Come on. Maria told me there's leftover lasagna in the kitchen. You're going to eat at least 3 bites while I tell you about the absolutely insane case I'm working on. Isabella let him pull her to her feet, let him guide her to the kitchen, let him pile food on her plate and tell her stories about his work as a public defender until she'd eaten more than she had in days. It wasn't healing, not yet, but it was something. That night, lying in bed in Leonardo's guest room, Isabella thought about Marcus's visit, about Catherine Chen filing her divorce papers, about Natalia refusing to let her give up, about Leonardo breaking into her bathroom and quite literally saving her life. She'd been so convinced she was alone, that she didn't matter, that no one would care if she disappeared. But here she was, surrounded by people who'd shown up, who'd fought for her, who refused to let Adrian Romano's indifference be the final word on her worth. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. She almost didn't open it, almost deleted it without looking, but something made her click. This is Adrian. We need to talk. Her breath caught. 4 days of silence, and now he wanted to talk? Now that she'd filed for divorce and escaped his control, suddenly he had something to say? She stared at the message for a long time. Part of her, the part that had loved him once, that had tried so hard to be enough, wanted to respond, wanted to hear what he had to say, wanted to believe he'd finally seen her. But the larger part, the part that was learning to survive, knew better. She deleted the message without responding. Then she blocked the number, and for the first time in 2 years, Isabella De Luca went to sleep feeling like maybe, just maybe, she was worth saving after all. The blocked number didn't stop Adrian from trying. Over the next week, messages came from different phones, his assistants, his attorneys, even numbers Isabella didn't recognize. Each one said the same thing in slightly different words. We need to talk. Please, just give me 5 minutes. Isabella deleted them all without responding. He's getting desperate, Leonardo observed one morning over coffee. He'd shown her how to forward the messages to him, creating a record in case they needed it later. That's when men like Adrian get dangerous, like, you think he'll try something? I think he's realizing what he lost and he doesn't like feeling powerless. Leonardo set down his phone. But my men are watching. He won't get near you. Isabella wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, absorbing the warmth. 2 weeks had passed since that night on the bathroom floor. 2 weeks of therapy sessions Catherine had insisted on, of Natalia's daily visits, of Marcus showing up with takeout and terrible jokes. 2 weeks of learning how to exist without the crushing weight of Adrian's indifference. She'd gained 3 pounds. It didn't sound like much, but Maria had actually smiled when she'd noticed Isabella finishing breakfast that morning. Catherine called, Leonardo continued. Adrian's attorney is pushing back on the settlement terms, wants to negotiate the support amount. I told her I didn't want his money. And she told you that's not how this works. Leonardo's expression was patient but firm. You gave up your career for him, Isabella. You're entitled to rebuild your life without worrying about rent and groceries. It feels like I'm punishing him. You're protecting yourself. There's a difference. He paused. Besides, the amount Catherine proposed is nothing to Adrian. Pocket change. He's fighting it because he wants control, not because he can't afford it. The doorbell rang. Maria answered it, and Isabella heard a familiar voice in the hallway, Catherine Chen, arriving unannounced. She swept into the kitchen like a force of nature, tablet in hand and fire in her eyes. We have a problem, she said without preamble. Adrian filed a counter-petition this morning. He's claiming you abandoned the marriage, that you left without cause, and he wants the divorce denied. Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. He can't do that. He can try. It won't work. We have documentation of his affair, witness statements about your emotional state, medical records from your therapy sessions. But it means this is going to get ugly. Catherine sat down, her expression grim. He's also demanding you return all gifts he gave you during the marriage. The jewelry, the car, everything. I don't care about any of that. He can have it all back. That's not the point. He's trying to humiliate you. Make this painful enough that you'll come crawling back and drop the divorce. Catherine's smile was sharp. He doesn't know you very well, does he? What do we do? We fight. We document everything. The affair, the emotional abuse, the night you almost died because he couldn't be bothered to answer your calls. We make it clear to the judge that this marriage was over long before you left. Catherine pulled up documents on her tablet. I need you to write down everything, Isabella. Every time he dismissed you, ignored you, made you feel worthless. Dates, if you can remember them. Witnesses, if there were any. Everything. The idea of cataloging 2 years of slow emotional death made Isabella's stomach turn. I don't know if I can. You can, Natalia said from the doorway. Isabella hadn't heard her come in. And I'll help. We'll do it together. Your sister's right, Leonardo added. Adrian wants you to roll over and accept his version of events. Don't give him that satisfaction. So Isabella spent the next 3 days writing. Natalia sat beside her the entire time, occasionally squeezing her hand when the memories got too heavy. They documented the isolation, how Adrian had gradually cut her off from friends and family, made her feel guilty for wanting to see anyone but him. The dismissals, how he'd stopped listening when she talked, stopped asking about her day, stopped seeing her as a person instead of an accessory. The affair, how he'd paraded Simone Laurent around Chicago like Isabella didn't exist. And finally, that night. The 4 declined calls, the 43 seconds of conversation before he hung up, the pills she'd been holding when Leonardo broke down the door. When she finished, the document was 27 pages long. Catherine read it in silence, her expression growing harder with each page. When she looked up, her eyes were blazing. He's going to regret filing that counter-petition, she said quietly. I'm going to make absolutely certain of it. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. Catherine prepared Isabella like a general preparing for battle. Mock questions, coached answers, strategies for staying calm under pressure. Adrian will be there, Catherine warned. Probably with his attorney and at least one associate to intimidate you. You'll be in the same room. Can you handle that? Isabella thought about it. 2 weeks ago, the idea of facing Adrian would have sent her into a panic attack. But something had shifted during those 3 days of writing. Looking at her marriage in stark, documented detail had crystallized something inside her. She wasn't afraid of Adrian anymore. She was angry. I can handle it, she said. Good, because he's going to try to make you doubt yourself. That's what men like him do when they're losing control. They gaslight. They manipulate. They make you question your own reality. Catherine leaned forward. Don't let him. Everything you wrote in that document is true. You know it. I know it. Soon the judge will know it too. The night before the hearing, Isabella couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark, running through Catherine's coaching, trying to prepare herself for seeing Adrian again. Would he look different? Would she feel that old pull toward him, the instinct to make herself small and acceptable? A soft knock on her door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. It's me, Natalia said. Can I come in? Yeah. Her sister slipped into the room, climbing into bed beside Isabella like they were teenagers again, sharing secrets in the dark. Can't sleep either? Natalia asked. Too much thinking. They lay in silence for a while, listening to the house settle around them. Do you remember when Dad died? Natalia said finally. How lost you were. I remember. I thought you'd never recover. You barely ate, barely slept, just went through the motions like you were somewhere else. Natalia turned to look at her. But you did recover. You came back. You were stronger than before. And then I married Adrian and fell apart again. No, you survived, Adrian. There's a difference. Natalia reached for her hand. Tomorrow you're going to walk into that courtroom and face the man who almost destroyed you. And you're going to show him that you're still here. Still standing. Still worth everything he was too blind to see. What if I freeze? What if I see him and forget everything Catherine taught me? Then you look at me. I'll be right there. And if you need a minute, you take it. There's no shame in that. Isabella squeezed her sister's hand. Thank you for everything. for calling Leonardo, for not giving up on me. You're my sister. I'll never give up on you. They fell asleep like that, hands clasped, two sisters against the world. The courthouse was a massive limestone building downtown, all marble columns and intimidating architecture. Leonardo's car pulled up to the side entrance at exactly 8:45, 15 minutes before the hearing. You don't have to do this, Leonardo said quietly. We can still settle. Avoid the courtroom entirely. No, Isabella's voice was steady. He wants a fight? He'll get one. Catherine waited inside, sharp in a charcoal suit, every inch the warrior. Marcus stood beside her. He'd asked to come for moral support, and Isabella had been grateful. Ready? Catherine asked. As I'll ever be. They walked through security and up to the third floor. The hallway outside the courtroom was crowded with other cases, other lives falling apart in paperwork and legal arguments. Catherine guided them to a quiet corner. Remember, answer only what's asked. Don't volunteer information. If you need a break, tell me. If Adrian tries to speak to you directly, ignore him. All communication goes through attorneys. She paused. And Isabella? You've got this. The courtroom was smaller than Isabella expected, more conference room than the dramatic spaces she'd seen on television. The judge's bench dominated one end. Two tables faced it, one for her, one for Adrian. He was already there. Isabella's breath caught when she saw him. Adrian sat at the opposite table with his attorney, looking exactly as he always did. Immaculate suit, perfect hair, the kind of presence that commanded attention without trying. He turned when she entered, and for a moment their eyes met. She expected to feel something, fear, maybe, longing, anger. But looking at Adrian Romano, the man she'd married with such hope, the man who'd made her feel so worthless that death seemed preferable to another day invisible in his life, Isabella felt nothing. He was just a man. Handsome, powerful, but just a man. And she was done giving him power over her. She took her seat beside Catherine without looking at him again. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen everything and been impressed by none of it. Judge Patricia Morrison, according to the nameplate. Good morning, Judge Morrison said, settling into her chair. I've reviewed both petitions and the preliminary filings. This is a hearing to determine whether we move forward with contested proceedings or if the parties can reach an agreement. Mr. Brennan, you're representing Mr. Romano? Adrian's attorney stood. David Brennan was maybe 50. Expensive suit, slicked back hair. The kind of lawyer who specialized in making problems disappear. Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Chen, you're representing Mrs. Romano? Ms. DeLuca, Your Honor. Catherine's correction was pointed. My client has resumed using her maiden name. Judge Morrison made a note. Very well. Mr. Brennan, your client filed a counterpetition claiming abandonment. Please summarize your position. Brennan stood smoothly. Your Honor, Mr. Romano contends that his wife left their marital home without warning or justification. He returned from a business trip to find her gone, along with a note that made vague accusations of neglect. Mr. Romano is deeply concerned about his wife's well-being and believes she may have been unduly influenced to file for divorce. Isabella felt Catherine tense beside her, but when she spoke, her voice was perfectly calm. Your Honor, may I respond? Please. Catherine stood, and Isabella saw what Leonardo meant when he said she was the best. She commanded the room without raising her voice, every word precisely chosen. Mr. Brennan's characterization is inaccurate to the point of offensive, Your Honor. Miss DeLuca did not abandon her marriage. She fled for her life. Catherine opened her tablet. I have documentation showing that on the night of October 15th, Ms. DeLuca called her husband 4 times. He declined all 4 calls. When he finally answered, she told him she needed him. His response, verbatim, was not tonight, before ending the call. 43 seconds later, Ms. DeLuca was found by a family friend with a bottle of prescription pills, contemplating suicide. The courtroom went silent. Isabella saw Adrian flinch. Judge Morrison's expression hardened. Continue. My client has been in intensive therapy since that night, Your Honor. We have medical documentation of severe depression and anxiety resulting from prolonged emotional neglect. We also have photographic evidence that Mr. Romano was publicly involved with another woman during the final months of the marriage, which he made no attempt to hide. Brennan stood quickly. Your Honor, Mr. Romano's private social life isn't private when it's splashed across the society pages, Catherine cut in. I have 17 photographs from various publications showing Mr. Romano with Ms. Simone Laurent at public events over a 3-month period. During this time, my client was home alone, isolated from friends and family, deteriorating mentally and physically to the point of suicidal ideation. Judge Morrison looked at Adrian directly. Mr. Romano, did you decline your wife's calls on October 15th? Adrian stood and Isabella heard his voice for the first time in weeks. Yes, Your Honor, but I didn't know. Did she tell you she needed you? A pause. Yes. And you responded by hanging up? I was at a business function. I thought she could wait until I got home. When did you get home? Adrian's jaw tightened. The next afternoon. So more than 12 hours after your wife told you she needed you, you finally came home to an empty apartment. Judge Morrison's voice was ice. And your response was to file a counterpetition claiming she abandoned you? I didn't understand the severity. You didn't ask. The judge turned to Brennan. Does your client have any evidence supporting his abandonment claim beyond his own narrative? Brennan shifted uncomfortably. We believe Ms. DeLuca was influenced by outside parties, specifically Mr. Leonardo Caruso, who has a documented history. Mr. Caruso saved my client's life, Catherine interrupted. He's a family friend who responded when Ms. DeLuca's sister called for help, something Mr. Romano notably failed to do. Judge Morrison held up a hand. I've heard enough. Mr. Brennan, unless you have concrete evidence of undue influence, I suggest you withdraw the counterpetition. Otherwise, we're moving forward with a full evidentiary hearing, and I promise you the details that will come out in that proceeding will not reflect well on your client. Brennan leaned down to consult with Adrian in furious whispers. Isabella watched them, detached. She could see Adrian's frustration, the way his hands clenched on the table. He wasn't used to losing, wasn't used to being challenged. Good. Let him feel powerless for once. Finally, Brennan straightened. Your Honor, my client would like a recess to discuss settlement options with Ms. Chen. Granted, 30 minutes. Judge Morrison stood. And Mr. Brennan? Advise your client that my patience is limited. If we reconvene and you're still wasting this court's time with unfounded accusations, I'll be significantly less diplomatic. The judge left and the courtroom emptied. Catherine immediately turned to Isabella. How are you doing? I'm okay. And she was. Better than okay, actually. Watching Judge Morrison dismantle Adrian's arguments had been cathartic in a way she hadn't expected. He's going to try to talk to you, Catherine warned, during the recess. He'll want to negotiate directly, bypass the attorneys. Don't engage. I won't. But of course, Adrian tried anyway. The moment they stepped into the hallway, he was there, moving past his attorney toward Isabella with the kind of focused intensity she remembered from their early days. Isabella, please, just give me 5 minutes. Leonardo materialized between them like a wall. Isabella hadn't even known he was in the courthouse. Mr. Romano, I don't think your attorney would appreciate you violating protocol. Adrian's eyes flashed with anger. This is between me and my wife. Former wife, soon enough. And no, it's not. It's between her attorney and yours. Step back. For a moment, Isabella thought Adrian might actually take a swing at Leonardo. His hands clenched, his jaw tight with rage. But Leonardo didn't move, didn't even blink, and finally Adrian took a step back. This isn't over, Adrian said, looking past Leonardo to Isabella. We need to talk, really talk, about what happened, about us. Isabella felt Catherine's hand on her arm, ready to pull her away. But something made her step forward, made her meet Adrian's eyes directly for the first time since she'd left. There is no us, Adrian. There hasn't been for a long time. Maybe there never was. Don't say that. I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this. You didn't make mistakes. You made choices. Her voice was steady, clear. You chose your business over me, your mistress over me, your party over my life. Those weren't mistakes. They were decisions. I didn't know you were that close to... He stopped, clearly unable to say the words. If you'd told me, I did tell you. I called you 4 times. I said I needed you. You hung up on me. Isabella felt Natalia beside her now, a solid presence. And even if I hadn't called, you should have known. You should have seen that I was disappearing. That's what people who love each other do. They pay attention. I do love you. No, you don't. You love the idea of me, the wife who made you look stable and legitimate. But the actual person, you stopped seeing her months ago. She took a breath. I don't hate you, Adrian. I don't even blame you anymore. But I'm done waiting for you to see me. I'm done making myself invisible to fit in your world. Adrian looked genuinely stricken, like he'd expected her to collapse or beg or give him the opportunity to play savior. Isabella, please. Ms. DeLuca, Catherine said firmly. We should discuss strategy before the recess ends. Isabella let herself be guided away, but not before she saw something flicker across Adrian's face. Not love. He'd been right about that. He'd never promised love. But maybe regret. Maybe the first real understanding of what he'd lost. In a small conference room, Catherine was practically vibrating with satisfaction. That was perfect. You were perfect. Did you see his face when the judge called him out? He looked shocked, Natalia said, like he couldn't believe someone was actually holding him accountable. Men like Adrian Romano operate on the assumption that their power protects them from consequences, Leonardo said quietly. It's good for him to learn otherwise. Marcus, who'd been silent through the whole proceeding, finally spoke. How are you really, Bella? That couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, but it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be either. Isabella sat down, feeling the adrenaline start to fade. When I looked at him, I just saw a man. Not the person I built my whole life around. Just a man who hurt me and doesn't deserve any more of my energy. That's growth, Catherine said. And it's going to serve you well when Brennan comes back with settlement terms. Because he will come back. Judge Morrison made it very clear this won't go well for Adrian if we proceed. She was right. 20 minutes later, Brennan knocked on the conference room door with a revised proposal. Catherine reviewed it, made some notes, and counter-proposed. They went back and forth 3 times before finally reaching an agreement. Isabella would receive a substantial settlement, enough to live comfortably for several years while she rebuilt her career. Adrian would keep the penthouse and his business interests. All gifts given during the marriage would remain Isabella's property, and the divorce would be finalized in 6 months with no further litigation. Take it, Leonardo advised when Catherine presented the terms. It's fair, and more importantly, it gets you free. Isabella signed the agreement without hesitation. When they reconvened in the courtroom, Judge Morrison reviewed the settlement with sharp eyes. Ms. DeLuca, do you agree to these terms freely and without coercion? Yes, Your Honor. You understand you're waiving rights to any future claims against Mr. Romano's assets or income beyond what's specified here. I understand. And you're satisfied this settlement adequately provides for your needs during the transition period? Isabella thought about that. Was she satisfied? She'd never wanted Adrian's money, had told Catherine repeatedly she just wanted out. But looking at the numbers on the page, she realized this settlement represented something more than financial security. It represented acknowledgement, proof that she'd given up something valuable when she married Adrian, proof that her time, her sacrifice, her suffering had worth. Yes, Your Honor, I'm satisfied. Judge Morrison nodded. Then I'm approving this settlement and setting a final hearing for 6 months from today. At that time, assuming no changes in circumstances, this divorce will be finalized. She looked at both parties. I strongly suggest you both use these 6 months for reflection and personal growth. Court is adjourned. Outside the courthouse, Isabella stood on the steps breathing in cold November air. It was done. Not finished. 6 months still stretched ahead. But the worst was over. She'd faced Adrian. She'd told her truth. She'd won. How does it feel? Natalia asked, linking their arms together. Strange. Good. Terrifying. Isabella laughed, surprised by the sound. All of it at once. That's called progress, Marcus said. You should celebrate. Celebrate a divorce? Celebrate survival, Leonardo corrected. Celebrate choosing yourself. Celebrate the fact that you're standing here instead of in a cemetery. The bluntness should have been jarring, but Isabella appreciated it. Leonardo didn't sugarcoat things, didn't pretend this was anything other than what it was. Her escape from a relationship that had nearly killed her. Dinner, Catherine announced. My treat. There's an excellent Italian place 2 blocks from here, and I think we've all earned pasta and wine. They walked together through Chicago's downtown, a strange little group, the divorce attorney and the crime boss, the public defender and the medical resident, and Isabella herself, still figuring out who she was beyond Mrs. Adrian Romano. At dinner, Leonardo raised his glass. To Isabella, for having the courage to leave. To second chances, Catherine added. To sisters who don't give up, Natalia said, squeezing Isabella's hand. To friends who show up, Marcus finished. Isabella lifted her glass, looking at the faces around the table. A month ago, she'd been alone, invisible, convinced she didn't matter to anyone. Now she was surrounded by people who'd fought for her, protected her, refused to let her disappear. To all of you, she said quietly, for saving my life. They drank together, and Isabella felt something shift in her chest, not happiness. That seemed too far away still, but maybe the shadow of future happiness. The possibility that life beyond Adrian Romano could be worth living. After dinner, Leonardo's driver took her and Natalia back to the brownstone. Maria had waited up, wanting to hear how it went. They sat in the kitchen while Isabella recounted the hearing, Judge Morrison's sharp words. The settlement agreement. So it's really over? Maria asked. In 6 months. But yeah, it's really over. And how do you feel about that? Isabella considered the question carefully. Relieved, sad, grateful, angry. She paused. Free. That night, alone in her room, Isabella looked at herself in the mirror. Really looked, for the first time in months. She'd gained weight. Her cheekbones were less pronounced, her face less gaunt. The dark circles under her eyes had faded. Her hair, which she'd neglected for months, was starting to look healthy again. She looked like a person. Not a ghost. Not a shadow. A real, solid, living person. Her phone buzzed. Another unknown number. Another message from Adrian finding a way around her blocks. I'm sorry. For everything. Please let me explain. Isabella stared at the message for a long moment. Part of her, the part that had loved him once, that had tried so hard to be enough, wanted to respond. Wanted to hear his explanation. Wanted to believe he finally understood. But she knew better now. Knew that his apology had come only after she'd taken her power back. Only after she'd stood in that courtroom and made him face consequences. Only after she'd proven she could survive without him. That wasn't real remorse. That was just loss of control. She deleted the message without responding. Blocked that number too. Then she turned off her phone and set it on the nightstand. Tomorrow, she'd start therapy again. Would continue the hard work of rebuilding herself from the inside out. Would take the first steps toward figuring out who Isabella De Luca was beyond the woman Adrian Romano had tried to make her. But tonight, she let herself simply exist, simply breathe, simply feel the relief of knowing she'd survived the worst and come out the other side. 6 months until the divorce was final. 6 months until she was legally free. But emotionally? Emotionally, Isabella had already left Adrian Romano behind, and she wasn't looking back. The following Tuesday, Isabella walked into her therapist's office for the 3rd time. Dr. Sarah Mitchell was maybe 40, with warm brown eyes and an office that felt more like a cozy living room than a clinical space. Soft lighting, comfortable chairs, plants everywhere. How are you feeling after the hearing? Dr. Mitchell asked once Isabella had settled in. Lighter, like I set down something heavy I'd been carrying for too long. That's a good start. Tell me more about that. Isabella tried to find the words. When I saw Adrian in that courtroom, I expected to feel something, fear maybe, or that old instinct to make myself smaller, less threatening, but I just felt nothing. He was just a man who'd hurt me, and I didn't owe him anything anymore. That's significant progress from where you were a month ago. A month ago, I was holding a bottle of pills. Exactly. Dr. Mitchell leaned forward slightly. Isabella, recovery isn't linear. You're going to have good days and bad days, days when you feel strong and days when you can barely get out of bed. That's normal. What matters is that you're still here, still fighting. I don't feel like I'm fighting. I feel like I'm just surviving. Survival is fighting, especially for someone who got as close to the edge as you did. Dr. Mitchell paused. Have you had any more suicidal thoughts since that night? Isabella considered lying, considered saying she was fine, that everything was better now. But Dr. Mitchell had made it clear from their first session that honesty was the only path forward. Yes, not as intense, not with a plan, but sometimes I wake up and think it would be easier to not exist, to not have to do the work of rebuilding myself. And when you have those thoughts, what do? I call Natalia, or I text Marcus. Sometimes I just go find Maria in the kitchen and help her cook. Anything to get out of my head. Good. That's exactly what you should be doing. Building a support network, reaching out instead of isolating. Dr. Mitchell made a note. What about your future? Have you given any thought to what comes after the divorce is finalized? Isabella hadn't. The past month had been about surviving the present, not planning for a future that still seemed impossibly distant. I don't know. I used to have plans. Before Adrian, I wanted to work in museum curation. I had my degree, had started applying for positions. Then I met him and everything changed. Can you go back to that? To museum work? Maybe. I don't know if anyone would hire me. I've been out of the field for 3 years. And everyone in Chicago knows who I am now. Adrian Romano's wife, his soon-to-be ex-wife. So you leave Chicago. The suggestion landed like a revelation. Leave Chicago. Leave the city where everyone knew her story, where she'd see reminders of Adrian around every corner. Start fresh somewhere new. I've never lived anywhere else, Isabella said slowly. My whole life has been here. My family, my friends. Natalia is doing her residency at Northwestern for 2 more years. After that, she could go anywhere. Marcus is portable. Public defenders are needed everywhere. Your mother is in Florida. The only thing keeping you in Chicago is familiarity. Doctor. Mitchell's expression was gentle. Sometimes the best way to find yourself is to get lost somewhere new. The idea terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. That night, over dinner at Leonardo's, Isabella brought it up. I've been thinking about leaving Chicago, after the divorce is final. Natalia's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Leave? Where would you go? I don't know yet. Somewhere I can restart. Maybe Boston or Seattle. Somewhere with good museums, somewhere I can rebuild my career. You're running away, Natalia said, and there was hurt in her voice. I'm choosing myself, Isabella corrected gently. There's a difference. Leonardo, who'd been quietly eating his pasta, spoke up. Your sister has a point. Running from your problems doesn't solve them. They just follow you to the new city. I'm not running from my problems. I'm running toward a future where I'm not defined by my past. Isabella set down her fork. Every time I walk through downtown, I see places Adrian and I went. Every restaurant, every street corner. I can't heal when I'm constantly reminded of what I lost. You didn't lose anything, Marcus interjected. He'd become a regular fixture at these dinners, showing up with wine or dessert and easy conversation. You escaped something toxic. That's not loss. That's liberation. It doesn't feel like liberation when I can't go to my favorite coffee shop without wondering if I'll run into Simone Laurent. Fair point, Leonardo conceded, but leaving won't erase what happened. You'll still carry it with you. I know, but maybe I can carry it somewhere it doesn't feel so heavy. Natalia was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. I just got you back. I'm not ready to lose you again. Isabella reached across the table and took her sister's hand. You're not losing me. I'm not disappearing. I'm just finding a place where I can breathe without feeling like I'm suffocating on my own history. When would you go? Not until after the divorce is final, and maybe not even then. I'm just considering options, trying to imagine what life looks like after all this. Promise me you won't make any decisions without talking to me first. I promise. But the seed had been planted. Over the next few weeks, Isabella found herself researching cities, looking at job postings for museum positions, imagining what it would feel like to walk down streets where nobody knew her story. Meanwhile, therapy continued. Dr. Mitchell helped her unpack 2 years of accumulated trauma, teaching her to recognize the patterns that had led her to that bathroom floor, the isolation, the self-blame, the belief that her worth was determined by Adrian's attention. You made yourself smaller to fit in his world, Dr. Mitchell explained during one session. You trimmed away pieces of yourself, your friends, your interests, your voice, until there was almost nothing left. Recovery means reclaiming those pieces. What if I can't find them? What if I cut away too much? Then you grow new pieces, better ones, stronger ones.
The Isabella who emerges from this doesn't have to be the same person who went into it. She can be whoever you decide to become.
Isabella started small. She joined a book club that met at a cafe in Lincoln Park. Spent her first meeting terrified someone would recognize her, would whisper about Adrian. But nobody did. They just talked about the novel they'd read, drank coffee, laughed at inside jokes. She was just another person in the group, not Adrian's wife, not a cautionary tale, just Isabella. She started painting again, too, something she'd loved in college but abandoned when Adrian made it clear he found it frivolous. Maria cleared out a corner of Leonardo's basement, and Isabella set up a makeshift studio. Nothing fancy, just an easel and some supplies Marcus picked up at an art store. The first time she stood in front of a blank canvas, brush in hand, she cried. For the version of herself she'd lost, for the years she'd wasted trying to be someone else, for the woman who'd almost died because she forgot she was allowed to take up space. Then she started painting. She wasn't good. 3 years of not practicing had dulled her skills. But it didn't matter. What mattered was the act of creation, of bringing something into existence that hadn't been there before, of proving to herself that she could still make something beautiful. Natalia found her in the basement one evening, covered in paint, working on an abstract piece that was mostly angry reds and deep blues. "That's intense," Natalia said. "It's how I feel, or how I felt. I'm working through it." Isabella stepped back to assess her work. Dr. Mitchell says creative expression is healthy, that it helps process trauma when words aren't enough. "It's good. Chaotic, but good." Natalia sat on an old stool watching her sister paint. "I've been thinking about what you said, about leaving Chicago." "And?" "I hate it, but I understand it." Natalia's voice was thick with emotion. "I want you to stay. Want you close where I can keep an eye on you, but I also want you to be happy. And if that means leaving, then I'll support you." Isabella set down her brush and pulled her sister into a paint-stained hug. "I haven't decided anything yet. I'm just exploring possibilities." "When you do decide, just promise you won't go somewhere terrible, like Kansas." "Nothing against Kansas, but you die of boredom." They both laughed, and it felt good. Normal. Like sisters joking about futures instead of sisters recovering from near tragedy. December arrived with Chicago's brutal cold. Isabella had been at Leonardo's for 2 months now, and while he'd made it clear she could stay as long as needed, she was starting to feel like she should find her own place. Not because she wasn't welcome, Maria had actually gotten teary when Isabella mentioned moving out, but because part of rebuilding meant learning to stand on her own. Catherine helped her find an apartment in Wicker Park, a small one-bedroom with exposed brick and big windows. It was nothing like the penthouse. It was maybe a tenth the size, with a kitchen barely big enough for one person. But it was hers, bought with settlement money, decorated with her own choices, filled with silence that felt peaceful instead of oppressive. Marcus helped her move in, along with Natalia and 2 of Leonardo's men who insisted on coming along just in case, as if Adrian would show up with a moving truck to kidnap her. But Adrian hadn't contacted her since the courthouse. Catherine said his attorney reported that he'd left Chicago for New York, was focusing on expanding his business there. Simone Laurent had apparently moved on to a wealthy tech entrepreneur. Adrian's world was continuing without Isabella exactly as it always had. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt oddly hollow. Not because she missed him, she didn't, but because 2 years of her life had ended with such a whimper. No dramatic confrontation, no final conversation, just signatures on paperwork and separate lives continuing. "You're overthinking it," Marcus said, assembling her bookshelf while she unpacked kitchen supplies. "He doesn't deserve your emotional energy, not even the energy it takes to feel nothing." "How do you know that's what I'm feeling?" "Because I know you. You're standing there staring at a coffee mug like it holds the secrets of the universe, and I'm betting you're not actually thinking about coffee." Isabella looked down at the mug in her hands, a simple ceramic piece she'd bought at a vintage shop, nothing like the designer china from the penthouse. "I'm thinking about how strange it is. I built my entire world around him, changed everything about myself to fit in his life. And now he's just gone, like he was never there. Good riddance." "But what does that say about me? That I gave up so much for someone who could walk away so easily?" Marcus stopped assembling the shelf and came over to her.
It says you're human, that you love someone who didn't deserve it, that you were vulnerable and he exploited that vulnerability. None of that is your fault, Bella. Feels like it is. Well, it's not, and eventually you'll believe that. He took the mug from her hands and set it in the cabinet.
Now stop philosophizing and help me with this shelf before I put it together backwards. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of easy companionship Isabella had forgotten existed. With Adrian, every silence had felt loaded, heavy with things unsaid. With Marcus, silence was just silence. I got a job offer, she said suddenly, in Boston. Assistant curator at a small contemporary art museum. It's not much, barely pays enough to cover rent, but it's in my field.
Marcus's hand stilled on the bookshelf.
When did this happen?
Last week. I applied on a whim, didn't think they'd call. But they did. Want me to start in March, after the divorce is final. Are you going to take it? I don't know. It would mean leaving, starting over in a city where I don't know anyone. Sounds terrifying. It does. Sounds perfect.
Isabella looked at him, surprised.
You think I should go? I think you should do whatever makes you feel alive again.
If that's Boston, then go to Boston. If it's staying here, stay here. But make the choice for you, not because you're afraid or because other people want you to stay. He went back to the shelf. You've spent too long making decisions based on what other people need. Time to be selfish. That night, alone in her new apartment, Isabella called the museum in Boston. This is Isabella DeLuca. I interviewed last week for the assistant curator position. Yes, Ms. DeLuca. We're so glad you called. Have you made a decision? She looked around her apartment, at the half-unpacked boxes, the bare walls waiting for art, the life she was building piece by piece in Chicago. She thought about Natalia, about the book club she'd just joined, about the therapist who was helping her heal. Then she thought about walking through downtown and seeing the restaurant where Adrian proposed, about the possibility of running into his associates, his friends, people who still saw her as Mrs. Romano instead of just Isabella. I'd like to accept the position. When would you need me to start? 3 months. She had 3 months to finish healing in Chicago, to prepare herself for the next chapter, to say proper goodbyes to the people who'd saved her life. She told Natalia the next morning over breakfast at their favorite diner. Boston, Natalia repeated, like she was testing how the word felt. That's far. 4-hour flight, and you've been talking about applying for fellowships on the East Coast after your residency. Maybe you could end up nearby. Maybe. Natalia pushed eggs around her plate. I'm happy for you. Really. This is good. This is you choosing yourself. But I'm going to miss you like crazy. You're my person, Bella. You're the one I call when I have a bad day or a good day or just a day. I don't know how to do life without you nearby. You did it before, when I was with Adrian and I basically disappeared from your life. That was different. That wasn't your choice. Natalia's eyes filled with tears. This is you actively leaving. I'm not leaving you. I'm leaving the city. There's a difference. Doesn't feel like a difference. They sat in silence while Natalia cried quietly into her napkin. Isabella reached across and took her hand. You saved my life, Isabella said softly. When I was too far gone to save myself, you picked up the phone and called everyone in Dad's address book until someone answered. You refused to let me disappear. I will never, ever forget that. Then don't leave. I have to. Not because I don't love you, but because I need to prove to myself that I can exist somewhere where my past isn't around every corner. I need to know I'm strong enough to start completely over. Natalia wiped her eyes. You're the strongest person I know. You don't need to prove anything. I need to prove it to myself. Eventually, Natalia nodded. Okay, Boston, but you have to call me every day and visit at least once a month. And if you meet some Boston guy who makes you happy, I get to meet him and approve. Deal. Telling Leonardo was easier. He simply nodded when she explained her decision, unsurprised. Your father would be proud, he said. Not of the marriage. That was a mistake and we both know it. But of this. Of you choosing to rebuild instead of giving up. That takes courage. I don't feel courageous. I feel terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the thing anyway. He poured them both whiskey. I'm going to set you up with some contacts in Boston. People who knew your father, people who will look out for you if you need it. You don't have to. I know. I'm doing it anyway. You're Giuseppe's daughter. That means something in my world. It will always mean something. They drank in comfortable silence, the way they'd learned to do over 2 months of shared meals and quiet conversations. Can I ask you something? Isabella said finally. That night you broke into my bathroom. How did you know? That I was serious? Leonardo was quiet for a long moment. Because your sister's voice on the phone reminded me of my daughter's voice when she called to tell me her mother had tried to kill herself. Same panic, same desperation, same certainty that someone she loved was about to do something permanent. He met her eyes. I didn't save my wife, but I could save you, so I did. I didn't know. About your wife. It was a long time ago. She survived, eventually got help, moved on with her life, but those 30 seconds on the phone with your sister, that was my second chance. My opportunity to do for you what I failed to do for her. Thank you for taking that chance. Thank yourself for opening the door, for putting down the pills, for choosing to live. He raised his glass. To new beginnings. In Boston or wherever else life takes you. They drank, and Isabella felt something settle in her chest. Peace, maybe. Or at least the possibility of it. The holidays arrived with an emptiness Isabella hadn't anticipated. Her first Christmas without Adrian, without the obligatory parties and business dinners and performances of marital happiness. She dreaded those events while she was with him. Now she found herself oddly missing the structure they'd provided. Natalia insisted she come to their mother's house in Florida for a week. Teresa DeLuca had been calling daily since learning about the divorce, worried about her daughter, wanting to help but not knowing how. The reunion was complicated. Her mother cried when she saw how thin Isabella still was, despite gaining back some weight, held her too tight and too long, like she might disappear if she let go. Why didn't you tell me? Teresa asked on their first night there, the two of them alone on the back porch while Natalia slept. About Adrian. About how bad things were. I didn't want you to worry, and I was ashamed. I'd married him despite you warning me it was too fast, too intense. Admitting the marriage was falling apart felt like admitting I'd failed. Marriage takes two people, mija. If it failed, that's on both of you, but mostly on him for treating you like you didn't matter. I let him treat me that way. I made myself small and quiet and invisible because I thought that's what he wanted. That's what would make him love me. Teresa took her daughter's hand. Your father and I didn't raise you to make yourself small for any man. We raised you to know your worth, to demand respect. Where did that woman go? She got lost somewhere between the wedding and the bathroom floor. Isabella's voice cracked. I'm trying to find her again. That's why I'm moving to Boston. Fresh start, new city, a chance to figure out who I am without Adrian defining me. Boston is far. I know. But if that's where you need to go, then go with my blessing. Teresa squeezed her hand. Just promise me you'll call if you need help. Promise me you won't disappear again. I promise. They sat together watching the Florida sunset. Two women who'd both lost husbands, one to death, one to indifference, finding their way back to solid ground. January came with brutal Chicago cold and the 6-month mark approaching. Catherine filed the final paperwork. The divorce would be official on February 15th, exactly 6 months after the settlement hearing. Isabella spent those final weeks saying goodbyes. To the book club, who threw her a going-away party and made her promise to visit. To Dr. Mitchell, who encouraged her to find a new therapist in Boston, but reminded her she could always call if she needed support. To Marcus, who took her to dinner and made her laugh until she cried and promised to visit in the spring. Leonardo gave her a going-away gift, a sealed envelope with a letter of introduction to several contacts in Boston. You don't have to use these, he said, but if you ever need help, these people will provide it, no questions asked. Maria packed her a box of homemade cookies and cried openly. You take care of yourself, honey. And you remember, what happened with Adrian doesn't define you. How you survived, it does. The hardest goodbye was Natalia. They met at their father's grave the day before Isabella's flight, standing together in the cold while snow fell softly around them. He'd be proud of you, Natalia said, echoing Leonardo's words from months ago. Not of the marriage, but of this,
of you fighting your way back. I couldn't have done it without you. You know that, right? If you hadn't called Leonardo that night, but I did, and you're here. That's what matters. Natalia linked their arms together. Promise me something. Anything. Promise me that if you ever get that dark again, that close to the edge, you'll call me first. Before you make any decisions, before you do anything permanent, you'll call me and give me a chance to show up. I promise. Because I can't lose you, Bella. Not after coming this close. They stood together at their father's grave, two sisters who'd survived loss and trauma and the long road back to themselves, and made promises they both intended to keep. The divorce became final on February 15th, a cold Tuesday that felt like any other day. Catherine called to confirm the judge had signed the papers, that Isabella was legally free. How does it feel? Catherine asked. Isabella thought about it. Anticlimactic. I expected something more dramatic, fireworks or trumpets, or at least a sense of victory. That's normal. The big moments rarely feel as big as we expect them to. But this is significant, Isabella. You survived something that breaks a lot of people. You came out the other side. That deserves recognition. Thank you for everything. For fighting for me when I couldn't fight for myself. Just doing my job. But for what it's worth, you were one of the strongest clients I've ever represented. Not because you didn't break, you did, but because you kept showing up anyway, kept doing the work even when it was hard. That's real strength. After the call ended, Isabella sat in her apartment surrounded by half-packed boxes. Tomorrow she'd fly to Boston. Tomorrow her new life would actually begin. But today, she was still in Chicago. Still in the city where she'd met Adrian, married him, nearly died because of him, and ultimately survived despite him. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Her heart lurched. She'd blocked so many of Adrian's attempts to contact her that she'd developed a Pavlovian response to unknown numbers. But this one wasn't from Adrian. Hi, Isabella. This is Simone Laurent. I know you have no reason to talk to me, but I wanted to say I'm sorry for my part in your pain. I didn't know how bad things were until I heard about the divorce. Adrian told me you'd wanted to leave for months, that it was mutual. I believed him. I'm sorry I didn't question it. I hope you're healing. You deserved so much better than what he gave you. Isabella stared at the message for a long time. The woman Adrian had paraded around Chicago while Isabella was home alone, contemplating death. The woman who'd unknowingly been part of the final breaking point. She could ignore it, could delete it and pretend it never arrived, could hold on to her anger at this stranger who'd been sleeping with her husband. Or she could choose something else, something that felt more like freedom. She typed back, "Thank you for reaching out. What happened wasn't your fault. Adrian lied to both of us. I hope you find someone who treats you the way you deserve. Take care." She hit send before she could overthink it, then blocked the number. Not out of anger, just out of a need to close that chapter completely. That night, Natalia came over with takeout and wine for one last sister dinner in Chicago. They sat on Isabella's floor amid the packing boxes and talked about everything and nothing. Natalia's cases at the hospital, Isabella's anxiety about the new job, their mother's insistence on visiting Boston within the first month. "Are you scared?" Natalia asked eventually. "Terrified." "Good. That means it matters. That means you're really doing this." Natalia raised her wine glass. "To my sister, who survived the worst and came out stronger. Who chose herself when it would have been easier to disappear. Who's about to start the next chapter of her life." Isabella raised her glass, and they drank together while Chicago's lights twinkled outside the window. The next morning, Isabella locked her apartment door for the last time. Leonardo's driver took her to the airport. He'd insisted, said it wasn't safe for her to take a cab, even though Adrian had long since stopped trying to contact her. At the airport, Natalia was already waiting. She'd taken the morning off work to see her sister off, refusing to say goodbye anywhere but the gate. They hugged for a long time, neither one wanting to let go first. "You've got this," Natalia whispered. "You're going to do amazing things in Boston. I know it. Come visit soon. I'll be there before you even finish unpacking." One last hug, and then Isabella walked toward security. She turned back once to see Natalia standing there, tears streaming down her face, but smiling anyway, waving, supporting her sister's choice, even though it broke her heart to watch her leave.
Isabella waved back, then turned toward her future. On the plain, somewhere over the Midwest, she looked out the window at clouds and sky and the ground far below. Thought about the woman who'd sat on a bathroom floor 4 months ago with pills in her hand and death in her heart. That woman was gone. Not erased, her scars remained, would always remain, but transformed, rebuilt, stronger in the broken places. Isabella DeLuca was starting over in a city where nobody knew her story, where she was just another person trying to make a life, not Adrian Romano's failed wife or the woman who almost didn't survive. She was just Isabella, and for the first time in years, that felt like enough. Boston greeted Isabella with freezing rain and gray skies that matched her anxiety. The apartment she'd rented sight unseen was in a converted brownstone in Jamaica Plain, a neighborhood the realtor had described as diverse and artistic. What that translated to was small, old, and nothing like anywhere she'd lived before. But it was hers, completely, utterly hers. No Adrian, no memories, just four walls and a future waiting to be written. She spent the first week settling in, exploring her neighborhood, trying to learn the subway system. Everything felt foreign and overwhelming. The accent was different. The layout made no sense. She got lost twice trying to find a grocery store 3 blocks from her apartment. On her 4th night, sitting alone in her half-furnished living room eating takeout pad thai, Isabella's phone rang. Natalia, right on schedule with her nightly check-in. "How's Boston treating you?" "It's fine. Cold. Different." "You sound miserable." "I'm not miserable. I'm just adjusting." Isabella pushed noodles around her container without eating them. "Did I make a mistake coming here?" "You've been there 4 days. Give it more than 4 days before you decide you made a mistake." Natalia's voice was gentle but firm. "Remember what Dr. Mitchell said, change is uncomfortable. That doesn't mean it's wrong. I just thought I'd feel more free, more like myself, but I just feel lost." "Then get unlost. Go explore. Find a coffee shop you like. Join a gym or a book club, or literally anything that gets you out of that apartment. I start work Monday. That'll help." "It will." "But Bella, promise me you're not just sitting there alone spiraling. Promise me you're actually trying." Isabella looked around her empty apartment, at the unpacked boxes she'd been avoiding, at the blank walls that needed art, at the life she was supposed to be building but hadn't quite started. "I promise I'll try harder." After they hung up, Isabella forced herself to unpack 3 boxes, hung some art on the walls, including the angry red and blue abstract piece she'd painted in Leonardo's basement, put books on shelves, made the space look less like a way station and more like a home. Small steps. That's what Dr. Mitchell had always said. Recovery was built on small steps, not giant leaps. Monday morning arrived with brilliant sunshine and temperatures that felt almost warm compared to the past week. Isabella dressed carefully for her first day, professional but not stuffy, confident but not arrogant. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. 4 months ago, she'd been a ghost. Now she looked alive. Nervous, uncertain, but alive. The museum was a converted warehouse in the Fort Point neighborhood, all exposed brick and industrial windows. Small compared to the Art Institute in Chicago, but respected in contemporary art circles. Her boss was a woman named Claire Hoffman, maybe 50, with silver hair and paint-stained fingers. "Welcome to the chaos," Claire said, giving Isabella a tour of the cramped offices and gallery spaces. "We're small but scrappy. Can't compete with the MFA for funding, so we make up for it in creativity and hustle." "I like scrappy." "Good, because you're going to be doing a little of everything. Curation, yes, but also grant writing, donor relations, exhibition installation, and probably some light plumbing when things break." Claire grinned. "Think you can handle it?" "Absolutely." And somehow she could. The work was demanding and all-consuming in the best possible way. Isabella threw herself into it with an intensity that surprised her, stayed late cataloging new acquisitions, volunteered for extra projects, spent weekends researching artists and writing exhibition proposals. Claire noticed. "You're a workaholic," she observed one evening when Isabella was still at her desk at 7. "I'm just committed." "You're avoiding going home to an empty apartment. There's a difference." Claire leaned against Isabella's desk. "I did the same thing after my divorce. Buried myself in work because it was easier than dealing with the wreckage of my personal life. Isabella looked up, startled. She hadn't told anyone at the museum about her past, hadn't mentioned Adrian or the divorce or any of it. How did you know I was divorced? You have that look, like you're rebuilding yourself from scratch and you're not quite sure what the final product is supposed to be. Claire smiled kindly. I'm not prying. Just saying, work is a good distraction, but eventually you have to actually live your life. Build something beyond professional achievements. I'm working on it. Good. Because you're talented, Isabella. Really talented. I can see you going far in this field, but not if you burn out before you even really start. That weekend, Isabella took Claire's advice. Found a yoga studio 3 blocks from her apartment and signed up for classes. Joined a book club at a local independent bookstore. Started going to a coffee shop every Sunday morning to read and people watch and slowly become part of the neighborhood fabric. She made friends, cautiously at first, then with increasing confidence. Sarah from yoga, who worked in tech and had also recently moved to Boston. The book club crew, an eclectic mix of artists and teachers and retirees who argued passionately about literature and always ordered too much wine. Her neighbor Miguel, who knocked on her door one evening because his cat had somehow gotten into her apartment through a window. Small connections, normal connections, the kind of casual friendships that had nothing to do with her past and everything to do with just being a person in the world. 3 months into her Boston life, Isabella was at a gallery opening for an artist the museum was considering for a solo show. She stood in front of a massive abstract piece, studying the way the artist had layered paint to create depth and movement, when a voice beside her said, "Interesting technique, almost like geological strata." She turned to find a man maybe her age, brown hair, kind eyes, holding a glass of wine and looking genuinely interested in the art rather than just networking. "Exactly," Isabella said, warming to the observation. "Each layer tells a different story. You have to look close to see how they interact." "I'm Ethan Caldwell. I teach art history at BU. "Isabella DeLuca. I'm assistant curator here." They talked for 20 minutes about the exhibition, about contemporary art movements, about their favorite pieces in the museum's permanent collection. It was easy and comfortable and utterly absent of the performance that had characterized every conversation she'd had with Adrian's associates. When the opening ended, Ethan asked if she'd like to get coffee sometime. Isabella hesitated. She wasn't ready for dating. Wasn't sure she'd ever be ready after Adrian. But this wasn't a date. This was just coffee. Just 2 people who liked art continuing a conversation. "Sure," she said. "Coffee sounds good." They met the following week at a cafe in Harvard Square. Talked for 3 hours about art and books and their favorite museums. Ethan told her about his dissertation on Renaissance painting. Isabella found herself telling him about her degree, about her dream of curating a major exhibition someday. She didn't tell him about Adrian, didn't mention Chicago or the divorce or the night she almost didn't survive. Those were her stories to tell when she was ready, if she was ever ready. For now, it was enough to just be Isabella. To talk about art and laugh at Ethan's terrible puns and feel like a normal person having a normal conversation. When they parted ways, Ethan asked if she'd like to do it again. "Maybe," Isabella said. "I'm not really looking for anything serious right now. I'm still figuring out who I am post—" She stopped, realizing she was about to reference the divorce. "Post-breakup?" Ethan finished gently. "I get it. I went through a rough split last year. Sometimes you need time to just exist without relationship pressure." "Exactly. So how about this? No pressure, no expectations. Just 2 people who like art occasionally getting coffee or going to museums together. Friends who appreciate aesthetics." Isabella smiled. "That sounds perfect." Over the next few months, Ethan became a fixture in her life. They went to gallery openings and museum exhibitions, had long debates about artistic merit and cultural significance. He made her laugh with his dry humor and terrible art history jokes, and slowly, carefully, Isabella told him pieces of her story. Not everything, not the pills or the bathroom floor or how close she'd come to the edge, but the broad strokes, the marriage that had made her disappear, the divorce that had set her free, the decision to leave Chicago and start over. Ethan listened without judgment, without pity, without trying to fix her. "You're stronger than you think," he said one evening over dinner at a tiny Italian place in the North End. Starting over in a new city after everything you went through? That takes courage. Or desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing. Sometimes the bravest choice is the desperate one, the one that scares you but feels necessary anyway. Isabella thought about that, about the desperate choice to leave Chicago. The desperate choice to open Leonardo's bathroom door instead of swallowing those pills. The desperate choice to keep breathing when dying seemed easier. Maybe desperation and courage were closer than she'd realized. 6 months into her Boston life, Isabella's phone rang with a Chicago number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Isabella? It's Catherine Chen, her old attorney. Isabella's heart lurched. Is everything okay? Did something happen with the divorce? Nothing like that. The divorce is final and settled. I'm calling with something else. Catherine paused. Adrian's dead. The words didn't make sense at first. Isabella heard them, processed them, but couldn't quite believe them. What? Car accident last night on Lakeshore Drive. He was alone, driving too fast, lost control, and hit a barrier. Catherine's voice was professional, but not unkind. I wanted you to hear it from me before you saw it on the news. Chicago papers are already running the story. Isabella sat down on her couch, phone pressed to her ear, trying to process this information. Adrian was dead. The man she'd married, the man who'd made her invisible, the man whose indifference had nearly killed her. Dead. Isabella? Are you there? I'm here, I don't know what to feel. That's normal. There's no right way to feel when someone from your past dies, especially someone whose relationship with you was complicated. Did he suffer? I don't know the details, but I wanted to make sure you knew. And to tell you that if there's any publicity, if reporters try to contact you as his ex-wife, refer them to me. You don't owe anyone your story. After they hung up, Isabella sat in her apartment as Boston traffic hummed outside her window. Adrian was dead. The chapter of her life he represented was closed not just emotionally but permanently. She waited for grief to hit, for sadness or regret or something. But what she felt was simply nothing. No relief, no pain, just a strange sense of finality. She called Natalia. I heard, her sister said immediately. Marcus called me this morning. He saw it on the news. How are you? I don't know. I thought I'd feel something, but I'm just numb. That's okay. He was part of your life for 3 years, but he's been out of it for almost a year now. You already grieved that relationship. This is just making it official. Should I go back for the funeral? Do you want to? Isabella thought about it, about flying back to Chicago, about seeing Adrian's family and associates and everyone who'd known them as a couple, about being Mrs. Romano one last time. No, that's not my world anymore. It never really was. Then don't go. You don't owe him anything, not even attendance at his funeral. So Isabella didn't go, didn't send flowers or condolences or acknowledgement of any kind. Instead, she went to work on the day of Adrian's funeral and curated an exhibition and lived her life in Boston like nothing had changed. Because nothing had changed. Adrian had been gone from her life long before he died. This was just the universe catching up to reality. That evening, Ethan showed up at her door with takeout and wine. I saw the news, he said. Figured you might not want to be alone. How did you know it was the same Adrian Romano? Former spouse of Isabella DeLuca from Chicago. Didn't take a genius to connect the dots. He held up the food. Chinese, okay? They ate on her couch and watched terrible reality TV and didn't talk about Adrian at all. Just existed together in comfortable silence. And Isabella was grateful for friends who knew when to show up and when to shut up. A week later, Catherine called again. Adrian's attorney contacted me. There's a clause in his will that concerns you. I don't want anything from his estate. The settlement was enough. It's not money. It's a letter. He left you a letter to be delivered after his death. His attorney is willing to send it if you want it, but you can also refuse to accept it. It's entirely your choice. Isabella thought about it. What could Adrian possibly have to say to her now? What words could matter when he was already gone? Send it, she said finally. I'll decide if I want to read it when it arrives. The letter came 3 days later. Thick envelope, Adrian's handwriting on the front. Isabella stared at it for 2 hours before finally opening it. The letter inside was 5 pages, handwritten, dated 2 months before his death. Isabella, if you're reading this, I'm dead. I'm writing this at my attorney's insistence. Apparently, successful men are supposed to have their affairs in order, including farewell letters to ex-wives. I don't know what to say to you. Sorry feels inadequate. Explanation feels self-serving. But I'm going to try anyway, because you deserve at least that much. I didn't understand what I had when I had you. That sounds like a cliche, but it's true. You were everything I thought I wanted. Beautiful, educated, connected to the world I was trying to enter. Your father's reputation opened doors for me. Your presence made me look legitimate. I used you. I know that now. Used you to build my image while giving you nothing in return. And when you needed me most, I wasn't there. I hung up on you. Went back to my party. Chose my own convenience over your survival. Catherine Chen sent me your documentation for the divorce. 27 pages detailing how I made you invisible. Reading it was like looking in a mirror and seeing a monster. Every incident you described I remembered, and every one I justified to myself at the time as necessary, as business, as just how things were. I was wrong about all of it. After the divorce, I tried to change, tried to be better. Went to therapy. Can you imagine? Adrian Romano in therapy, talking about feelings and childhood trauma like some kind of self-help cliche. But I did it because I couldn't live with what I'd almost done to you. The therapist asked me if I loved you. I couldn't answer, because the truth is I don't think I'm capable of love the way normal people are. I'm capable of possession, of appreciation, of wanting to keep beautiful things close. But actual love, the kind that sees another person and values them for who they are rather than what they provide. I don't know if I have that in me. You deserved someone who could love you that way. I'm sorry I wasn't that person. I'm sorry I made you feel worthless when you were actually the most valuable thing in my world. I'm sorry I answered your call with not tonight when you were asking permission to keep living. I heard you moved to Boston, started over. I'm glad. I hope you're finding yourself again. I hope you're building a life that makes you happy. I hope whoever you choose next sees you the way I never learned to. I know you won't forgive me. I don't expect you to. But I wanted you to know that I understand what I did, that I'm sorry for the pain I caused, that you were never the failure in our marriage. I was. I hope you have a beautiful life, Isabella. You deserve it. Adrian. Isabella read the letter 3 times, and with each reading, felt something loosen in her chest. Not forgiveness. She wasn't sure she'd ever fully forgive Adrian for what he'd put her through. But maybe understanding, maybe closure. He'd known. At the end, he'd understood what he'd done. And while that didn't erase the damage, didn't undo the trauma, it was something. She called Dr. Mitchell. She'd been seeing a new therapist in Boston, but still checked in with Dr. Mitchell occasionally. He apologized, Isabella said after reading the letter aloud. Admitted everything, said I deserved better. How does that make you feel? Sad? Relieved? Angry that it took him dying to actually see me? Isabella folded the letter carefully, but also free. I spent so long wondering if I'd been the problem, if I'd been too needy or too demanding or just not enough. This confirms it wasn't me. It was him. All along it was him. And now? Now I'm going to live my life, build my career, make friends, maybe eventually date someone who actually sees me as a person instead of an accessory. She paused. I'm going to be okay, Dr. Mitchell. I really think I'm going to be okay. I never doubted it. Isabella kept the letter, but didn't read it again. Put it in a box with her divorce papers and the settlement agreement and all the other documentation of that chapter of her life. Closed the box and put it in the back of her closet. Not forgotten, but finished. Summer arrived in Boston with humidity and street festivals and the kind of beautiful weather that made the brutal winter seem worth it. Isabella's exhibition proposal was approved, a show featuring emerging female artists exploring themes of identity and transformation. It would open in the fall and be her first major curatorial project. She threw herself into the work with joy instead of desperation, traveled to artists' studios, wrote catalog essays, made decisions about installation and lighting and flow. Claire watched her transformation with satisfaction. You're coming into your own, she observed. The Isabella who started here 6 months ago was talented but tentative. This version is confident, powerful. I'm learning to trust myself again. Good. Keep it up. And I hope you know, when I retire in a few years, I'm recommending you for my position. You're going to make an incredible director someday." The validation felt different than anything she'd received during her marriage. This wasn't conditional on making herself small or acceptable. This was recognition of her actual abilities, her vision, her worth. In August, Natalia visited for a long weekend. They explored Boston together, walking the Freedom Trail, eating cannoli in the North End, drinking wine on Isabella's tiny balcony while watching summer thunderstorms roll in. "You look happy," Natalia said on their last evening together. "Really, genuinely happy." "I am. Most days, anyway. I still have hard moments, still see therapist Dr. Peterson twice a month, still have days when I can't quite believe I'm actually here, actually surviving." "But you are surviving. More than that, you're thriving." Natalia raised her wine glass. "To my sister, who chose life when death seemed easier, who rebuilt herself from scratch, who's creating something beautiful out of what could have destroyed her." They drank together as lightning flickered in the distance, two sisters who'd weathered the worst and come out stronger. The exhibition opened in October to excellent reviews. The gallery was packed for the opening reception, artists and collectors and critics, all admiring the work Isabella had curated. She stood in the center of it all, watching people engage with the art, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Pride. Pure, uncomplicated pride in something she'd created. Ethan found her near the end of the evening. "This is incredible, Isabella, really. You should be so proud." "I am. For the first time in forever, I actually am." "Can I take you to dinner? To celebrate?" She looked at him, this kind, patient man who'd been her friend for 8 months without asking for anything more, who'd shown up when Adrian died, who'd listened to pieces of her story without judgment, who made her laugh and challenged her thinking and never once made her feel small. "I'd like that, but Ethan, I need you to know, I'm still figuring myself out. I'm better than I was, but I'm not all the way there yet. I come with baggage and scars and trust issues that might never fully heal." "We all come with baggage. The question is whether we're working on unpacking it or just carrying it around forever." He smiled. "And from where I'm standing, you're doing the work. That's all anyone can ask." So they went to dinner. And then they went to another dinner. And slowly, carefully, Isabella let herself imagine the possibility of something more than friendship. Not because she needed Ethan to complete her. Not because she was trying to fill the Adrian-shaped hole in her life, but because she'd rebuilt herself enough to have something whole to offer someone else. They took it slow. Ethan never pushed, never demanded more than Isabella was ready to give. And gradually, over months of dinners and museum visits and quiet evenings on her couch, Isabella realized she was falling for someone who actually saw her. Not as an accessory, not as an image enhancer, but as Isabella, complicated and damaged and working on healing, but worthy of love anyway. On a cold November evening, almost exactly a year after she'd arrived in Boston, Isabella stood in her apartment getting ready for dinner with Ethan. She caught her reflection in the mirror and paused. The woman looking back was almost unrecognizable from the ghost who'd sat on a bathroom floor contemplating death. She'd gained back the weight she'd lost. Her eyes were clear and bright. She smiled more, laughed more, took up space without apologizing. Her phone rang. Marcus calling from Chicago. "Hey stranger, how's Boston?" "Good. Really good, actually. I'm curating another exhibition for spring, and I think I might be dating someone." "Might be. We're taking it slow, but yeah. His name's Ethan. He's kind and smart, and he makes me laugh, and he's never once made me feel like I should be less than I am." "Then I like him already. When do I get to meet him and threaten him appropriately?" Isabella laughed. "Natalia's already planning to visit for Thanksgiving. You should come too. We'll make a whole thing of it." "I might just do that. I want to see this new life you've built." After they hung up, Isabella finished getting ready. Ethan was taking her to a French restaurant near the waterfront. Nothing like the ostentatious places Adrian had favored, but intimate and warm and perfect. As she walked through Boston's streets toward the restaurant, Isabella thought about the journey that had brought her here. About Giuseppe De Luca, who'd raised her to know her worth even when she'd forgotten it. About Natalia, who'd refused to let her disappear. About Leonardo, who'd broken down a bathroom door and saved her life. About Catherine and Dr. Mitchell and Marcus and Maria and everyone who'd fought for her when she couldn't fight for herself. and about Adrian, who'd taught her what she didn't want, who'd shown her that being loved badly was worse than not being loved at all, whose death had finally closed a chapter that needed closing. She'd survived all of it, had taken the worst experience of her life and transformed it into something that made her stronger, wiser, more compassionate. Inside the restaurant, Ethan stood when he saw her, smiling that warm smile that made her feel seen and valued and enough. "You look beautiful," he said, and she knew he meant it. Not beautiful as in decorative, but beautiful as in fully present, fully herself. "Thank you, so do you." They ordered wine and appetizers and talked about their days. Normal, mundane conversation about work and friends and weekend plans. The kind of easy dialogue that had eluded Isabella for so long. Halfway through dinner, Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. "I know we're taking this slow," he said, "and I respect that. But I want you to know, I see you, Isabella, all of you, the parts you've healed and the parts still healing, and I'm not going anywhere." Tears pricked her eyes. "I'm still broken in places. We're all broken in places. That's what makes us human." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm not looking for perfect. I'm looking for real. And you're the most real person I've ever met." Isabella looked at this man who'd been patient while she found herself again. Who'd listened to her story without trying to fix her. Who valued her mind and her passion and her strength instead of trying to diminish them. And she realized something profound. Adrian had been right about one thing in his letter. She deserved someone who could really love her, who could see her as a full person rather than a beautiful object to possess. Ethan was that someone. "I'm falling for you," she said quietly. "It terrifies me, but I am." "I'm falling for you too, and it terrifies me too. Want to be terrified together?" She laughed through her tears. "That sounds perfect." They finished dinner and walked along the waterfront, hand in hand, talking about everything and nothing. Isabella felt lighter than she had in years. Not because Ethan had fixed her, she'd done that work herself, but because she was finally whole enough to let someone in without losing herself in the process. 2 months later, Isabella stood at a podium in front of 200 people at a fundraiser for suicide prevention. The organization had reached out after learning her story. Not the details, just the broad strokes that Catherine had approved her sharing publicly. She'd debated for weeks whether to accept, whether to stand in front of strangers and talk about the lowest moment of her life, whether exposing her trauma would help or just re-traumatize her. But Dr. Peterson had encouraged her. "Your story could save someone's life. Isn't that worth the discomfort?" So there she stood, looking out at faces she didn't know, preparing to share pieces of herself she'd kept hidden. "My name is Isabella DeLuca," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "A year and a half ago, I sat on a bathroom floor with a bottle of pills in my hand, convinced that dying was easier than living one more day invisible in my own life." She told them about the marriage that had made her disappear, about the night she called for help and was dismissed, about her sister refusing to give up, about Leonardo breaking down the door, about the long road back to herself. "I'm not here to tell you recovery is easy," she said. "It's not. It's hard and messy, and sometimes you take 3 steps back for every 1 step forward. But I'm here to tell you it's possible, that you can survive the worst thing and come out the other side, that you can rebuild yourself into someone stronger than you were before." She talked about therapy and support systems and the importance of choosing yourself even when it feels selfish, about learning to value your own life even when someone else doesn't. "If you're in that dark place right now," she finished, "if you're sitting where I was sitting 18 months ago, please hear this. You matter. Your life has value even if you can't see it right now. And there are people who will fight for you if you just ask for help. Call someone, anyone. Give them a chance to show up for you the way my sister showed up for me." When she finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then someone in the back started clapping, then another, then everyone, and Isabella stood there with tears streaming down her face as 200 strangers applauded her survival. After the event, a young woman approached her, maybe 22, with haunted eyes that Isabella recognized instantly. "Thank you," the woman whispered, "for telling your story. I've been where you were. Still am, some days. But hearing you, knowing someone made it out, it helps." Isabella took the woman's hand. "You can make it out too. I promise. It won't be easy, and it won't be fast, but you can." "How do you know?" "Because you're here. Because you came to this fundraiser instead of giving up. Because some part of you still believes life is worth fighting for. Isabella squeezed her hand. Hold on to that part. Feed it. Let it grow until it's bigger than the darkness. The woman nodded, tears in her eyes, and walked away clutching the crisis hotline card Isabella had given her. On the drive home, Ethan was quiet. That was brave, he said finally, telling your story like that. I know it couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, but it was necessary. If my story saves even one person, then everything I went through meant something. It meant something anyway. You survived. You rebuilt yourself. That alone is meaningful. Isabella leaned her head against his shoulder. I used to think the worst thing Adrian did was hang up on me that night. But actually, the worst thing was making me believe I didn't matter. That I was invisible. That my life had no value unless someone else gave it value. And now? Now I know better. I matter because I'm here, because I contribute to the world, because I create beauty and help artists and show up for people I care about. My worth isn't dependent on someone else seeing it. It's inherent. 2 years after that night on the bathroom floor, Isabella stood in her own gallery in Boston, a small space she'd opened with a grant and her own savings, showcasing emerging artists whose voices deserved to be heard. The opening reception was packed with people who'd come to see art, support creativity, celebrate new voices. Natalia had flown in from Chicago, where she'd just finished her residency. Marcus was there too, along with Leonardo and Maria, who'd made the trip to see what Isabella had built. Claire and her colleagues from the museum. Ethan's family, who'd welcomed Isabella with open arms. Sarah from yoga and the entire book club crew. Her mother stood in the corner crying proud tears while pretending she wasn't. Your father would be so proud, Teresa said, pulling Isabella into a tight hug. Look at what you've built. Look at who you've become. I became who I always was. I just forgot for a while. Well, you remembered. That's what matters. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Isabella stood in the center of her gallery and looked around at the life she'd created. Not perfect. She still had hard days, still saw her therapist, still carried scars from everything she'd survived. But hers. Fully, completely hers. Ethan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Happy? He asked. Yes. Actually, genuinely happy. She turned in his arms to face him. I never thought I'd be able to say that and mean it, but I do. You know I love you, right? It was the first time he'd said it outright. They'd danced around it for months, but he'd been waiting for the right moment. I know. And I love you too. She kissed him softly. Thank you for being patient while I figured myself out. Thank you for letting me be part of your journey. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the gallery was locked up, Isabella walked along the Charles River with Ethan. The water reflected city lights, and somewhere in the distance she could hear music from a street performer. She thought about Adrian's letter, about his apology and his admission that he'd never really loved her, about how she'd once believed that was devastating when it was actually freeing. She thought about the woman she'd been, desperate for approval, willing to disappear to keep peace, convinced her worth came from being chosen. And she thought about the woman she'd become, strong, purposeful, choosing herself first, and building a life that reflected her values instead of someone else's expectations. Penny for your thoughts, Ethan said, just thinking about how far I've come. 2 years ago, I wanted to die. Tonight, I stood in my own gallery surrounded by people who loved me, celebrating art and creativity and life. It's almost hard to believe they're the same person. They're not the same person. You've transformed, become someone new. No, Isabella corrected gently. I became myself again, the person I was always supposed to be before I let someone else define me. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached Isabella's apartment. Inside, she made tea while Ethan queued up a documentary they'd been wanting to watch. Normal. Everything about this was wonderfully, beautifully normal. As they settled on the couch together, Isabella's phone buzzed with a text from Natalia. I'm so proud of you, big sister. Look at the empire you've built. Look at the woman you've become. Dad would be beyond proud. I know I am. Love you forever. Isabella texted back. Love you too. Thank you for not giving up on me when I'd given up on myself. Never. You're stuck with me forever. She set down her phone and curled into Ethan's side, watching the documentary without really processing it. Her mind was too full of gratitude and wonder and the simple joy of being alive. She thought about all the people who'd saved her, Natalia making those desperate phone calls, Leonardo breaking down the door, Catherine fighting for her rights, Dr. Mitchell teaching her to heal, Marcus showing up with terrible jokes and unconditional friendship, Maria feeding her body while everyone else fed her soul. And she thought about the moment she'd chosen to survive. Not the dramatic moment when Leonardo arrived, but the quieter choice she'd made every day since. To keep breathing, keep healing, keep building a life worth living. Survival hadn't been a single decision. It had been thousands of small choices made over and over day after day, until suddenly she realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. Fully, completely, joyfully living. 3 years after that night on the bathroom floor, Isabella received an invitation to speak at a national conference on domestic emotional abuse and recovery. Her speech from the suicide prevention fundraiser had been shared online and gone viral. Thousands of people had reached out to thank her for telling her story, for giving voice to their own silent suffering. She'd started a blog documenting her recovery, not in grim detail, but with honesty about the hard work of healing. It had grown into a community of survivors supporting each other, sharing resources, refusing to let shame silence them. Her gallery had expanded to a second location. She'd published her first book, a collection of essays about art, identity, and transformation. She was living a life bigger and more meaningful than anything she could have imagined in that bathroom. Standing on the conference stage in front of 3,000 people, Isabella no longer felt nervous about sharing her story. Emotional abuse is insidious, she told the crowd. It doesn't leave visible scars. It doesn't give you black eyes or broken bones. It just slowly erases you until you wake up one day and realize you don't exist anymore. You're just a reflection of someone else's needs and wants and expectations. She talked about the warning signs she'd missed, the gradual isolation, the dismissals that accumulated like snow until she was buried, the moment she'd internalized his indifference as proof of her worthlessness. But here's what I learned, she continued. Someone else's inability to love you properly doesn't say anything about your worth. It says everything about their capacity. My ex-husband couldn't see me because he was incapable of seeing anyone beyond what they could do for him. That was his limitation, not mine. She ended with the same message she always did. If you're in that dark place, reach out, ask for help. Give someone a chance to show up for you. And if you've already survived, use your voice. Tell your story, because someone out there needs to know they're not alone. That survival is possible. That life on the other side of trauma can be beautiful. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Afterward, in the speaker's lounge, a conference organizer approached her. That was powerful, Isabella. We'd like to invite you to join our board of directors. We need voices like yours helping guide our organization's mission. Isabella accepted without hesitation. This was her purpose, helping others find their way out of the darkness she'd escaped. On the flight back to Boston, she wrote in the journal Dr. Peterson had encouraged her to keep. 3 years ago, I thought my story was ending. I thought the pain was too much, the darkness too deep, the erasure too complete. I was wrong. My story wasn't ending, it was just beginning. Everything before was prologue, teaching me what I didn't want, showing me what I deserved, preparing me for the life I was meant to build. Adrian's worst act hanging up on me that night forced me to choose myself. He thought he was dismissing another inconvenience. Instead, he set me free. I'm grateful for that now. Grateful for the darkness that taught me to appreciate light. Grateful for the breaking that taught me how to rebuild stronger. Grateful for the despair that taught me the value of joy. I'm alive. I'm thriving. I'm using my pain to help others, and every single day I choose myself, choose life, choose growth. That's not just survival, that's triumph. She closed the journal as the plane descended into Boston, the city lights spreading below like possibilities made tangible. Ethan waited at the airport with flowers and that warm smile that still made her heart skip. How was the conference? Life-changing, exhausting, perfect. She kissed him hello. I have so much to tell you. I have something to tell you, too. He looked nervous suddenly, in a way that made Isabella's breath catch. Can we go somewhere, talk? They drove to their favorite spot overlooking the harbor. Ethan parked and turned to face her. I've been thinking about the future, he said. Our future. And I know we're taking things slow, and I respect that. But Isabella, I love you. I love who you are, who you're becoming, who you help others become. And I want to spend my life with you, if you'll let me. He pulled out a small box, and Isabella's heart stopped. This isn't a proposal, he said quickly. Not yet. You've told me what your first marriage did to you, how it made you disappear. I would never want that for us. But this is a promise. He opened the box to reveal a simple ring. A promise that I see you, that I value you, that I will never ask you to be less than you are. And when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here. Isabella looked at the ring, then at Ethan, then back at the ring. A year ago, the idea of another commitment would have terrified her. But this wasn't Adrian demanding she mold herself to fit his world. This was Ethan promising to build a world with her where they both had room to grow. I'm not ready yet, she said honestly, but I will be, someday. And when I am, I want it to be with you. I can wait. Thank you for understanding, for being patient, for loving me even when I'm still figuring out how to love myself. You're doing more than figuring it out. You're mastering it. He slipped the promise ring onto her right hand, and I'm honored to be part of your journey. They sat together overlooking the water, talking about dreams and plans and futures that felt possible now in ways they never had before. Isabella thought about the woman who'd sat on that bathroom floor, the woman who'd believed death was the only escape from invisibility, the woman who'd almost never gotten to experience this moment. She silently thanked that woman for opening the door, for putting down the pills, for choosing to see if maybe, just maybe, life was worth one more day. Because look what one more day had become. Look what survival had built. Look what choosing herself had created. Isabella DeLuca had almost disappeared completely. Instead, she'd been reborn, stronger, wiser, more compassionate, more herself than she'd ever been. She'd taken her darkest moment and transformed it into light for others. She'd survived the worst and created something beautiful from the wreckage. And every single morning, when she woke up in her Boston apartment with sunlight streaming through the windows and a life full of purpose and love and meaning, she made the same choice she'd been making for 3 years. She chose to live. She chose herself. She chose to matter. And that choice, made over and over again, had built an empire of second chances, not just for herself, but for everyone who heard her story and found the courage to write their own. The night she almost disappeared had become the night she truly found herself, and she was never letting go again.